All right, guys. So we are live. This is going to be much less structured than the last one. As you notice, we don't have the lovely framing that we had before. Now it's just Google Hangout. It's time to de-stress after
Yeah.
what we just had to go through.
Oh dear.
I don't have words for how I feel.
Oh, you want me to give the words?
You know what? Here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to make myself a bowl of cereal because listening to all of that and not screaming means that I probably deserve a bowl of chocolate cereal. So I'm going to grab a bowl of cereal. You can go ahead and do the word things.
I will summarize what we went through for the last hour or so. The first part of the show wasn't about the flat earther because he hadn't shown up yet. He came in on the chat and said, "Yeah, I'm here," and then it took a while for Cyrus to be able to find the linkages to bring him into the field because it wasn't easy. And apparently, this guy Tom doesn't actually go online on the internet to do the videos, but he does apparently haunt various feeds, and he's doing stuff just by text. So this was kind of a new form. He's some English sort of speaking person who we discovered apparently was a fundamentalist Christian who then has kind of become a Muslim, kind of sort of. He's very remarkably vague on a lot of his things, but apparently is now Islamic. And he's a young earth creationist and a flat earther, but an odd form of flat earth where yes, there is the ice wall and all that and the big firmament of water up above and all that sort of thing, but and the planets and stars are the big light bulbs up in the sky. They're not really physical bodies and all that kind of stuff, but there's some weird idea that he has that there's a multi-dimensional quality to the Earth, which is why Magellan was able to sail around from one end to the other. So this is kind of like, I think he's envisaging the Earth as a big Escher print, where if you get in the boat and you sail around, you end up where you came in before, but it's still flat, but it seems like it isn't, that you've gone around it. Needless to say, he's not terribly detailed on anything. And as Cyrus and I discovered when we were trying to probe him on what sources he was using, where was he coming up with this stuff, we couldn't get man, back with the cereal. I'm just completing my summary. I was just getting to the point of where repeated attempts to find out where the hell this guy gets his sources from hit a brick wall every single time.
Yeah, pretty much. Also, for anybody who watched the stream and would like to vent whatever they heard or cry, I'm at the point of crying.
Come on in.
By all means, let me know. I will send you a link of some form or fashion as I can. I know that we're going to have Not Joe Witness and Frustrated Atheist on here in a little bit because they mentioned that they want to hop on. We might actually also have Holy Kool-Aid coming in because this is kind of his field as well. He's an incredibly pro-science person, but he's in the middle of a stream right now, so he may or may not be in.
Yeah. And I want to thank all the ones that helped raise the money, like Lickety Split, for the microphone. I was thinking that we might get a little bit here and then might have to do it again sometime to build some more up. And that, but holy moly, I was just thanks.
Oh yeah, that was. I figured we would do well, but we did way better than I thought, and this is good because me and RJ have been talking about getting him equipment upgrades for I think a solid 3 weeks now.
Yeah, and I'm, it was just a matter of the faster we can get things going, then we can record the audiobook, which the world is clamoring for and needs. But I think it'll be a really fun thing because I love doing the theater end of it. I love reading the dialogue. You've heard me do some read-throughs from some of the sections, and I think it's going to be cool.
So the unfortunate side effect. And also let me know if you want to hop in because I'll send you a link. You're like one of my favorite people on the planet.
Is they going to be here?
I would love if they would come in here because they is freaking awesome. In fact, actually, check your Twitter because you actually should have. That is not what I'm trying to send.
They can explain why Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landing.
Exactly. Oh, in fact, actually, have you seen They's channel?
I've seen a couple of the postings he's done. Yeah, I freely admit that my time is such that I don't spend a lot of time watching most videos. I will pick targeted ones. on very specific systematic issues, or occasionally if there's some god-awful creationist thing that I go, oh, I can't miss this, I've got to have this one. And a lot of Pelagia's material, and Trey the Explainer, there's another one that does really spectacular work, and it's stuff that's really good contributions to the field, and it acts as good puts up. So I put that into my reference bibliography on a lot of points. But it's a time-consuming thing, because an hour and a half video, if I got it running, I can listen to it, but often I'm multitasking for other purposes, and so I'm jumping back and forth trying to keep my train of thought on tracking down some source material. And oh, you think of the hunter in the woods or Elmer Fudd, it's I'm hunting rabbits.
I'm hunting primary sources.
Yes, I'm hunting primary sources. Yeah, because when I find a really upper echelon creationist, the ones that live and die by their bloody footnotes, that's where they're going to fall apart. And I just messaged Jackson Weed. In fact, there was this source where Andrew Snelling was citing this paper by Begeman, and I was able to get the full text. And the thing was about that ionization was somehow or other accelerating radioactive decay. And the paper doesn't discuss that. It doesn't claim that at all. There's nothing in there about ionization and radioactive decay. And so it's just one of these so going, oh, Andrew, what was going through your head? So I'm dismantling Snelling, hopefully on a scale that is beyond what everybody else has done. There have been various critics of him over the years, but I want to leave him as a little gutted shell on the side of the road.
I'm actually, let me see if I can, it's 1:14 in the morning. He may or may not hop online. My friend John was watching the show. His channel is JMD Apologetics. He's a Christian, but he's old earth and not, super against science. He's closer to Cy Garth than Kent Hovind, which is one reason we can be friends. How's it going, Nacha?
G'day. How are we?
So what was your opinion of the insanity that you had to witness?
Unfortunately, I came in a bit late, but of what I saw, I was headbanging from the moment till the end.
He came in only about an hour in, so
sore. And the stupid was strong with that one.
Yeah. I call him a smorgasborder. He's one of those that basically is trawling and making up their own thing, that he's not really drawing on any actual doctrinal position.
I believe that Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landings because when you see the movie The Shining, there is a rocket on the child's sweater. Really?
Good Lord.
We're not making this up.
That's exactly what he said.
I mean, this is lower echelon. He's making Edgar, Mr. Intelligent Design, seem erudite.
Actually, in the chat, somebody mentioned that they missed Mr. Intelligent Design through listening to him.
He's amiable. He's the sweetest little drelb. He's one of these the kinds that he's so utterly ebullient about what he does, but there was a certain dour quality about Tom Tom that was not quite so enthusiastic. But boy, trying to get him to think about his own reasoning, to think about how he was using words and how he was misleadingly using words and leading himself into a little circular rut that way. You can't dislodge him.
No, you can't. And the thing that was so confusing during the whole thing is that I figured that at least the easiest thing that we'd be able to get him to do would be to describe the definition he was using for a word, because I'm a firm believer that conversations cannot happen if we don't agree on definitions. And if we don't agree on definitions, I'm 100% okay with granting you all of yours. I'll grant you every one of your definitions as long as it means we continue the conversation. But it does mean that I need to hear your freaking definitions. I need to know what you mean. Are you using... I asked him if he used a word as a noun or a verb, because it could be used as both. It was worship, and he refused to say, because he was using it as if it was a noun, but I needed to figure out if he was really if he meant to use it as a verb. And for that, I needed to just ask him, like, hey, are you saying this is worship as in this is a stagnant thing that just is, like we have a method of worship for NASA that can have a vacuous definition, or is it an active thing? We actively have to be worshiping something as opposed to vilifying it, because at that point we're dealing with something different, which we're definitely not. I can maybe see the previous definition where it's a noun. I can't see it as a verb, so I need to figure out what he means. And 10 solid minutes of not even defining. It's harder to define a word. It's easier to just take a freaking binary set of options and work with them.
Yeah, and it even got worse than that, because he got himself in a weird logical bind that you realized he was in, but he didn't, is that he was claiming, A, that we worship NASA, and that worship involves faith,
and that we have no
faith. In which case, how can we be worshiping NASA when we have no faith, and that's the requirement for worship? He didn't realize that he had just sidled out on the diving board and gone into the empty pool.
That's exactly why I word bound him. That's what you do when somebody doesn't have any working definitions in their head for words that they even want to have usages for. You can word bind them very easy by going, hey, answer these things. If you answer these things, then we can come up with a coherent sentence and everything's fine. If you refuse to answer these things, then you're going to freaking tie your own legs up and then fall out.
I got into a weird experience on Steve McRae's thing with Cy Tendenbrook, whatever his name is.
Cy Tendenbrook,
creationist. Yeah. And he was wanting me to define truth. And unless I defined a simple definition of truth, we couldn't even go on. And I explained what I meant by truth, that there are things that are so independent of your opinion of them. I had no problem with the idea of some of that bumping into external reality, but belief truths can't do that because they're presuppositional, they're definitional, normative in nature. And he just didn't want to allow that, because his little apologetics involved a very narrow definition of truth and to drag you on the field. Oh, we got they. Hello, they.
We do have they.
Hello, fellow conspirators.
So I have a question.
My NASA check for being part of the globalist conspiracy. I'm not getting nearly well enough paid.
Yeah, I was going to say that my shield check isn't in the mail yet. Could you please fix that?
Well, actually, I recently released a video explaining everything you need to know about the shield checks.
So they're in the mail, right?
Sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the Bitcoin is in the mail.
Actually, it shows that it was kind of a thought experiment. And it just basically shows that if you want to believe that there are no satellites, it will cost you, if you are a shill, to perpetuate the globe lie. Every shill owes $48,000.
Yeah, it's a ludicrous amount of money that can't be justified by any government that wants to maintain being an entity.
I love the idea that he came up with, that nobody knows how big land masses are.
I have no idea how we would measure those, except by measuring them the way that we have. Wait.
And that we have done over and over. Surveyors have been spending their jolly well thing. It's the number of people. Alfred Wallace was a surveyor. He made his living at it for many years. And there were a bunch of people that, that the idea that you can't physically figure out layer by layer, square mile by square mile, how big stuff is, and put all the pieces together and figure out how the big thing works, and you get better and better at it over time. He was just flushing down the drain centuries of work. He couldn't even acknowledge that Newton ever did an experiment.
Nice. I really do wonder about people like Jar Jar Binks. How the hell somebody that, like, rejecting so much of reality can even get any form of job, like doing anything, because pretty much everything
we don't know that this poor schmuck is employed.
There's a good point, but there's so many of them out there, they can't all be unemployed.
Well, that too, they may do a variety of things within a narrow niche. They may be perfectly capable of doing stuff in the same way. If you imagine a world in which the economic system didn't collapse in Germany in the 1920s, and Hitler ends up as that annoying house painter who keeps on grumping about the Jews, but he has a modicum of living. That same kind of thing might apply there.
Also, hi, blue people. How are you doing? Welcome to the insanity that is the after show of, well, the insanity.
Hello, blue people.
I'm happy to be here.
So if anybody has seen any of my gaming streams where I've done League of Legends, Blue People's actually been on some of those streams. If you recognize his voice, that's where you'd recognize it from for the, like, 5 people that watch me play video games.
Yeah, probably one of the ones raging.
That's
Is it separate from Blue Man Group?
Yes.
It's actually a Beatles reference. For the benefit of Mr. Kite.
Yellow Submarine?
No. The benefit of Mr. I think it might be on that album, actually.
Because there were the Blues. The Blue People were the Blue Meanies in Yellow Submarine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember that.
By the way, I have 2 versions of Yellow Submarine. The one that's been going around now is the DVD Blu-ray version. That's the original English edition. But I, by happenstance, when I discovered that I put it on to check when I had the DVD, my old Laserdisc is the American release of the film that's slightly different. They changed some of the animation. They got rid of one of the songs. And I go, whoa, actually, this is not quite the same movie.
Yeah. But you also have the original UK release as well?
Oh, well, the UK one is the one that's on the current video. They apparently didn't like one of the songs. There was a song about an attack dog or some such thing, and then they decided to alter some of the animation. And that's the version that was always on video. The Laserdisc, I think, came out in mid-1990s, something like that. And that was the only video version of Yellow Submarine at the time. And then years later, Kaboom found out about the new edition. There are a lot of movies that are in that format. Oklahoma is in 2 different versions, and the one that's the standard one now is the big Todd AO version, but the CinemaScope version that was the standard video release is actually a different movie because they were literally filming it twice because they couldn't use the same format in each one of the films because one's 70 millimeter and the other was 35. So they had to film the 70 millimeter version first, and then they would refilm all the scenes in CinemaScope. So they're using the same dubbing for the soundtrack and that, but it's not the same movie. Choreography slightly different. People are tired on the second takes. The clouds have moved in. It's a different movie.
That's really weird.
Yeah. There were a couple films in the very early days of widescreen because there were ones where you didn't have an easy way of converting. Todd AO was the process that Michael Todd came up with. He had developed Cinerama, which was a triple screen thing that was really awkward to film in, and directors hated working in it, actors hated working in it, everybody hated working in it, but it was gobsmackingly beautiful. And he then said, can you make a format that uses single camera to do the same thing, pretty much? And so the American Optical Company came up with Todd AO, but when they did Oklahoma, there were almost no theaters equipped in it. So they had to do the CinemaScope backup so that they could show it in most of the theaters because any Fox theater would have a CinemaScope lens. Then he finally pulled the plug, and when they did Around the World in 80 Days, it was filmed fully in Todd AO, and that was the first big official release, which one of these days they'll come out with a Blu-ray edition of that because, oh my God, Todd AO is a spectacular process. Cleopatra was done in Sound of Music. I mean, there's a whole bunch of movies that were in Todd AO. It's gigantically big screen. That's the one thing I regret is how few movies I ever saw in theaters. And that the big giant screens that were in the big metropolitan areas, I never had a chance to see. I've never seen a VistaVision movie on a giant VistaVision screen. I've never seen curved screen CinemaScope, curved screen Cinerama. We are all used to flat screen, big, but modestly big. And even the IMAX. We had an IMAX theater here for the World's Fair that we did in I-74, and that was the first time I ever saw IMAX, and my God, that thing was gigantic. And then we did a second version when they refitted after the fair, and they put in an IMAX theater, and they still had the same projector and everything, but the screen was smaller. The building they put it in was that, so the screen was closer to you, and it was maybe, physically only about half as big as the one that was in the fair. And I still remember, oh my Lord, that was a giant image.
It's one of the reasons why I wish that I had seen Lion King in theaters, because because I know that like the scene where Scar is first shown, where like the paw smacks down. Supposedly, that scene when you're in theaters, you feel that scene happen. But when you're watching it just home video, it's a paw came down. Well, that's neat. It's not the same thing in the feeling the actual gravity of the situation that way.
Oh, when he kills the mouse at the beginning, or tries to catch the mouse for dinner or whatever.
Yes. Yeah, supposedly that if you see that in theater in high enough quality, like you can actually feel that come down, is what I've had told to me, and I want to watch not only because I actually really like the movie, but I'd love to watch it in theaters on a large screen so that I can actually get the proper feeling of that movie, because that movie is supposed to be massive in scope, and it's really only properly viewed on a big screen because there's so many wide paneling shots that make looks so much better on a screen than on your home.
We're getting better now, and now that they're in the digital projection era, that's opened up a lot of floodgates. Because before, Douglas Trumbull, for example, was always pushing for ShowScan, which was his high frame rate film process. And he did one movie, Brainstorm, that had little segments done in it. But it was really hard to do these things in normal theaters because you'd have to have the projectors for them. But now that the things are all digital package, they can film anything in IMAX. They can film it in 40 frames per second. They can film it in 3D. Doesn't matter. You just put it on the digital and stick the damn packet in, and it projects out through the thing, and it doesn't matter. So people are playing around with multiple screen formats and high projection rates and all of that. They did that in the Hobbit movie, and that is going to make things more interesting, provided we do good content in the course of it.
Yeah. Can't just make it's one of the issues I have with a lot of like 3D movies, for instance, is that with a lot of 3D movies, you have movies that are sold solely on the fact that they are 3D, not that they are also good movies.
Really and some are basically 2D movies with things pointing at you.
Yeah,
that they do some 3D effects. Avatar was effectively done. He really made use of the 3D frame even in background details that was very, very meticulously done. And when it's done well, boy, I never saw any of the old clunky 3D movies, and I'm nearsighted in one eye and farsighted in the other. So the ones that use the little paper lens kind of things never work for me. It just looks like one side's red, one side's low. But I had seen a process that Kodak had developed. It was down at Disneyland, in fact, in I think the spot where Star Tours was put in years later. So it's not even there anymore. But it was a film process 3D that you did wear special lenses for, but they weren't clunky. And wow, that was good.
They versions of those they use everywhere now. Me and Pam we went to see Ready Player One. We were so disgusted by the movie because we were both fans of the book that we just kept our glasses. We were just like, I'm going to keep those things. I'm sorry, you took 2.5 hours of our time. You're not getting these glasses back.
Yeah, I still ponder in my fantasy world of the film version of Phileas Fogg whether or not I'd want it to be filmed in 3D or not. I'm not sure it needs to, but at least I want to go for IMAX, and we got to get an Oscar for sound mixing because sound effects are extremely important in the story.
With that said, Blue, I have a question. How much? I got a message from you at one point saying that the conversation was too much and you were getting too angry at it. At what point did you decide to throw in the towel?
I only really watched for like 5 minutes. The guy just couldn't. Like his response to any point was, "I don't believe that," but he doesn't present any evidence whatsoever. Or like when you were asking him, like 300 years of physicists providing evidence and scientific data, and he's like, "I don't believe it."
Well, it's like, that was like, in the nutshell. That was him. That's his blanket answer.
But so like, I don't know why you guys even gave him a dialogue, because like he had nothing to contribute to the conversation.
We're masochists, and I had a method to it. I wanted to probe his method, and even though he didn't answer our questions, that non-answer became an answer. That you can observe his failure of methodology by the asking of the questions. And so, from my end of it, it was extremely productive. Plus, I found out how old he thought the Earth was. And I was practically ticking off the bingo card boxes of dumb, and it delighted me.
Remember that one of the things that
was he a young Earth creationist as well?
Yeah.
is a younger,
which makes him, as Suris noted, that's unusual for Islam, but you occasionally find elements of it. Actually, flat Earth is much more common in the education system in Saudi Arabia. They're hyper conservatives there, and you actually find flat Earth stuff in some of their apologetics to this day. But it is unusual for most Muslims.
Yeah, it's very weird to me because typically in the pro-Islamic world, and especially in Islamic apologetics, one of the things that they have going for them is that they're very, very progressive in the sciences and they're very progressive in mathematics. They're incredibly well versed, way better than we are here in the States. I know that doesn't really matter much for you, Blue. It doesn't only not Joe. It really is only
like our education system is not like is pretty much the same as the U.S. We're not. I don't think we're much higher or lower than the U.S.
That might be the case. But like one of the things that we constantly see from Muslim apologetics is that their education system is so good and robust compared to ours. But then you get somebody who's a flat earther from it, and it throws the entire thing out the window.
Well, it's unusual. Again, if you look, as I pointed out in one of the other chats, Iran still kept all of the science education system of the Shah, so they still teach evolution and all of that. But you do find anti-evolution apologetics among Islamic apologists these days. What they tend to channel, though, is the intelligent design branch of anti-evolutionism. So you get a lot of the same tropes and material that will show up at the Discovery Institute funneled into that. And Harun Yahya, the wacky Turkish creationist, he channels a ton of intelligent design material. He started out initially, his very first book in 1999 was actually a young earth creationist channeling thing. And then I guess he decided, uh-oh, that ain't going to fly. So he stuck with everything else, old earth creationist intelligent design ever since. And then just recently, Kent Hovind was actually channeling a Harun Yahya article for one of his videos, and I'm going, oh dear, the blind leading the blinder.
Yeah, it's like the video that I just did on the, I don't even remember his name. His channel is, what is your worldview, evolution versus creation? And the guy has like posters in his background of Kent Hovind and young earth creationist propagandic material. And the thing that's wonderful about that is the picture that he has of Kent Hovind shows a picture of Guy Fawkes, who's a Catholic, and being a Catholic would make him essentially an old earth creationist now, with Kent Hovind as the undertitle. And I don't.
You have a little snippet of young earth creationist Roman Catholics. They're hyper conservatives. They're the kinds that don't like Vatican II. And some of them are geocentrists. So there's a little bit of that in there. So there's little niche markets in Catholicism that still show that too.
But the church, like the Holy See or whatever governing body, they recognize the earth is round and is more than 6,000 years old, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. The church doctrinally doesn't pay diddly squat attention to it. Mormons are another weird example because technically they've not ventured an opinion on evolution or geochronology either. But there are about the same proportion of young earth creationists in the Mormon church as actual people as there are in the American population. It's like 30 or 40%. So, but the church itself doesn't take a doctrinal stand. So in any one of these little issues, that's one of the reasons why I try to make the source methods approach so important, to find out where people are getting their information from, to kind of pin down where they are on the landscape. Because if they just say, oh, I'm doubtful of evolution, oh, there's a whole bunch of little animal stripes on that one. You got to try to find where they are on the landscape then to know how to react to it, because they're too much variety.
Yeah.
Like I don't mind people being skeptical of our understanding of evolution, but like you can see it happen under a microscope at the microevolution level. Like you can't deny it. It's just our understanding of evolution isn't 100%. We don't understand all the mechanisms.
It's probably never going to be 100% because science doesn't even work on being 100%.
Yeah, for sure.
It's about being.
But you remember, they don't connect the dots. This is another thing. One of the big mega books that will be down the trail of things I got to do is the book on speciation and kinds, because that is a monstrous roadblock in all anti-evolution. Literally 100% failure rate. That even ones who, as a theoretical principle, allow new species to occur, can't connect that with the whole data field. So they literally cannot look at a fossil transition line and look at the penumbra of each individual blip on the scope to find out how much it could naturally vary, and realize that this one connects to this one, that connects to this one, connects to this one, and that there's no break in the thing based on that speciation factor. Literally, none of them can do that. And so so even though you can look at any attempt to bring up microevolutionary bacterial resistance issues, it just deflects right off, because they want to see a cat turn into a dog. Well, if you could, or you want to see an ape turn into a human being right there in the zoo, and if you can't do that, which of course you can't because that's not how evolution works, then all of the discussion of bacterial resistance is just boop. Lenski's work, it's just
What's funny about that is a fun demonstration I did on Steve McRae's channel. He hosted a conversation between a guy named Chris and a guy named Tim. The guy named Tim, he has a particularly, I'm trying to remember the exact word for what he had, agnotheist, I think, was his epistemology. And then Chris was a young Earth creationist. Or he was kind of like a cat theorist, rather. He was sort of not Joe Witness. You would actually have a lot of experience with this kind of guy. The old Earth creationists who believe in the 6,000-year-old humans and hand bridges. Very in the Jehovah's Witnesses sect of science.
Yeah.
When he kept on saying they were talking about morality, and somehow the conversation got to evolution, which that is a portion of the morality debate. And when Steve opened up the channel for Open Hangout instead of just discussing between the two, I hopped in, and he kept on spouting about how evolution's not true, blah blah blah. And the first thing I said was, "I have a question. What is our closest common ancestor?" And his immediate response was, "Well, Dawkins says it's a chimp." And I went, "Well, hold on. First of all, Dawkins doesn't say it's a chimp. Secondly, it's a bonobo. Thirdly, Dawkins says it's a bonobo, and I can show you the video where he does. So you've just demonstrated you don't know diddly shit about what you're talking about. So I don't have to continue the conversation past this point. I've already demonstrated that you're refuting something you don't understand."
Yeah, the other big area that builds into that.
I hate to split hairs, but I thought bonobos were just a species of chimpanzees.
There are two separate ones. Yeah, Pan peniscus and Pan something or other. Yeah, the bonobos are the make love not war at a drop of a hat species of chimpanzee. I can't remember how far back the split was for them. If memory serves me, I think it was like 5 or 10 million years. Some of them are surprising. The current species of orangutans only split off about 300,000 years ago, which is around the same time our species was originating out of Homo erectus. So there's an awful lot of it. So that notion that, well, how come the apes aren't evolving too? Well, they are actually. At the same rate we are.
Yeah, it's that when you say our closest is a chimp, well, no. The closest would be a chimp in the same way that a human is a chimp. A bonobo is a split-off cousin from it in the same way that humans are split-off cousins from them. When you say that it's a chimp, then you've only heard rhetoric. It's the same thing as saying,
well, they're both pan. Like they're both pan. They're very similar. So I would accept chimpanzee or bonobo.
I would accept chimpanzee, except for the assertion that he said that Ann Dawkins says this too, which is demonstrably wrong.
And Dawkins is not a paleoanthropologist, and he's an old fart. We have technical information now. It's the 21st century. Let's at least, but can't the creationists at least upgrade their argument to this century?
The problem with me is that there's this weird idea that atheists have thought leaders. And to an extent, maybe we have people who are prolific, but they're not the same thing as thought leaders. I know more atheists that disagree with Dawkins than most. Like, I know a lot that disagree with Harris. I know several that disagree with Dawkins. The only prolific figures in atheism, if you can even consider it a combined effort of any kind, really Hitchens seems to be one of the few sticking points that most people will agree on. But when you start getting to a lot of people, there's people who don't like Roth, there's people who don't like Harris, there's people who don't like Dawkins. Like, I don't. Yeah. The idea of thought leaders in atheism is really weird to me when you consider the fact that people are so individualistic among atheists. Our opinions are very, very.
I literally never read any of Dawkins. I became an atheist by reading the Bible, and this was back as a kid. Their problem was when when my mom put me in, found out about this, and I was actually checking the cross references in my Bible study in Methodist Church, and boy, that got me kicked out in a hurry. And this was back in early '60s, so it had nothing whatsoever to do with Dawkins. And I literally paid no attention to Dawkins, any of his writings, for many, many years because he was irrelevant to dinosaurs. That was my interest. So I bumped into some of Stephen Jay Gould's stuff because I liked his essays, but Dawkins I could care less about, and only started studying Dawkins's work because he was a lightning rod for the anti-evolutionists. They were constantly going after Richard Dawkins, so I guess I'm going to have to read this guy to find out why they're bringing him up all the time.
I just read Gould in my evolution class last semester. I read Mismeasure of Man. Have you read that?
Yeah, although there are little bits and pieces. There was a paper that was done, about maybe 5 or 10 years ago where they looked through, I can't remember, Morton or whatever the guy that he was criticizing in that. Gould was wrong. He misread the mismeasure. That they went through Morton's original notes and stuff and found that Gould had cherry-picked his information. There was a little bit of a minor scurry flap about it. So even Gould was not perfect.
I did look at that too, and I believe that paper was released by an institution that actually owns a bunch of Morton's stuff. So they actually have like a bit of a bias towards Morton.
Well, but they had access to the material. Most every scientist... science is a bumpy operation. They found out a lot of things as they looked at it with Louis Pasteur's work, how he often would, when he was doing some of his experiments, when he found that he was getting negative results, he just plowed on as if it hadn't happened. And, they can actually look at the original material because it's human beings and they're trying to figure out what their ways are. But I'd say that between Gould and Dawkins in terms of worldview and in terms of influence on things, Gould has been way more influential than Dawkins has. I think in the long term, Dawkins's big contribution will be the meme, which we still haven't quite gotten pegged down with. But Gould, punctuated equilibrium with Niles Eldredge, spandrels, which pops up all the time as a concept, exaptations. These are just constantly referred to in the technical literature because they're really useful tools. Dead silence.
I was waiting on Blue to respond because you guys are having a wonderful discussion about literature.
No, he's much more well read than I am. So
I mean, he could be much more well read. RJ is 1,000 times smarter than I am, and we have conversations every week.
No, I just had no response. It's close to my bedtime, so
fair enough. You're in that
you
upper.
Turn it into a pumpkin at midnight or anything like that.
I turn into a gremlin, actually, not a pumpkin.
Oh well. Oh, without water, that's good.
Yeah. No. I think it's if you feed me after midnight, then I go.
Oh, they're okay. Yeah, that's it.
League.
What's that?
I have my anti-gremlin field at my house, so I don't have to worry about all that.
That's why you get so angry when we play League. You just start eating past midnight, and all the freaking Gnar in you just comes out.
I go Mega Gnar.
My curse is that I think historically. So when I look at people making use of Dawkins quotes or Gould quotes or anything, I'm looking at, well, when was it made? What year was it? Well, why? Why are you quoting something from 1982? It's not 1982 before. What's happened since then? So then you start putting it into perspective. And you get stuff... Fodor, and he wrote a little book with somebody else where they were going after Darwinian adaptationism, and it was all, they were fighting wars between Dawkins and Gould from the 1990s and the sociobiology issue. It's almost like green eye shade stuff. It's like talking about phlogiston because we got homeobox genes now. We got MRIs. We're moved on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Everything's genetics nowadays too in biology, like either even turning away from like the old taxonomy and moving into like classifying people by or species by just their genome and not even like...
Yeah, because you've got the you can do full genomes. That's the substrate of what's going on. It's systematics hasn't stopped. And in fact, now that it's using cladistic analysis, which deals with character states, of which some of which can theoretically be connected up to genetics, because when you're looking at the phenotype, when you're looking at the physical organism, all of that's coming about from genes. And now we've got the actual genetic system, so we can figure out how scales and skin scale placodes are turning into feathers and hair. We can look at how the snout of an archosaur is turning into a bird, because we can retro-engineer it. So the little buzzword that I'm trying to popularize is paleogenomics, where they're now learning enough about how the genes are put together that they can start experimentally tweaking with them and retro-engineering the stages of stuff to discover experimentally what had gone on in the past. That's a real cutting-edge field, and it's only getting bigger.
Meanwhile, I'm just sitting here mesmerized by Natja blinking. I can understand why people watch my videos and give me more watch time than they used to now that my avatar blinks. It all makes sense now. Just watching Natja blink. Like, I need to actually make it.
I haven't put them into my videos yet. I've got to make them blink in my videos.
You really do. Like, it's.
I think either you need to dress like your avatar, or you should just put your avatar's picture up.
Me?
Yeah.
You want to make your avatar in the uncanny valley, so it'll freak everybody out.
No, you gotta get the hood going and everything, and the arm.
Pam hasn't made me the hood yet. Pam
really?
Pam says that she wants to make me the entire getup for my avatar, which will be good because it means that I'll have an easy access cosplay for Dragon Con, because I've already got my Doomhammer. So
well, yeah, and you can crack walnuts.
Do you? Oh, so RJ, you couldn't see. You maybe could have heard, but during the stream, there were certain portions where I literally was doing nothing but slamming my head with the hammer. The audience was witnessing it. The audience was watching me do that.
Yeah.
Who was that guy? Anyway.
His name is Mr. Tom Tom, I believe, and he's a flat earther who's apparently prolific in a lot of UK flat earth groups, like Facebook groups and stuff like that. Apparently he shows up in a lot of them. He's a meme lord. He throws out a lot of flat earth memes. This is all just based off of what I gathered from the chat. And originally the plan was to have a flat earther on, because I actually had a friend of mine in high school who became a flat earther in the interim between then and now somehow. Multi-Tom Tom was his name. Okay, Skylar just fixed that for me. But originally I was going to have him on, and he was like, no, I actually can't. I was like, okay. There's another person who was maybe going to be able to come, but then when I said, hey, can you come on to do a show, he was like, oh, no, I'm going to get ganged up on and abused. And I'm like, I mean, no, I think we were very fair to Tom Tom during the discussion. I think we were very gentle. But then in the middle of the stream, Tom Tom said, I can't handle the stuff that RJ is saying. This is all bullshit. Give me the link in 20 minutes when I'm done eating. And I'm like, okay, absolutely. I'll send you the link.
We'll see whether or not the two things that just gobsmacked me. One of them was this claim that rocks, the moon rocks, are actually petrified wood. And I burst out in a giant roar because I'd love to see. Oh, we got a new person in there.
How's it going, Holy Kool-Aid?
Sup?
Kool-Aid.
Did you see our interaction?
This is an after show for the flat Earth discussion that we just had with Multi Tom Tom on my channel, and let's just say that there's probably a hammer-sized dent on my head after what I had to listen to and stay silent for, because I was moderator.
Yeah. Oh, he was putting like, I want to die in the live chat feed because he couldn't say anything, and I said, I can sympathize with that. Yes,
that's awesome. Yeah, no, I haven't moderated any flat Earth debates, but I've had some. I've taken on the flat Earthers a couple times.
This might be one of the only times that I have it on my channel, because there's a reason that Delano TV is the only flat Earthers that I've talked about on my channel, because to me there are no low-hanging fruits among flat Earthers. Flat Earthers are the low-hanging fruits of young Earth creationism.
Yeah, and some will not just a subset of.
It's not just young Earth creationists, though. There was a flat earther that went on The Right to Reason, Robert Stanley's podcast, and he was an atheist who believed that the Earth was flat.
Same thing
Yeah,
with Jaredism.
I bumped into one of those, and it's weird to figure out how they managed to do that. And that's why whoever they are, it's fun from a methods direction if you can get them to answer methods questions, which, as we discovered with TomTom, was not easy, as in not possible.
I asked him a binary question because he started a sentence that required clarification, and I wanted to make sure that the conversation could continue without equivocation. So he said that all atheists worship NASA. NASA is our God. So I asked him, could you please define worship? And he couldn't define worship. And I said, okay, if you can't define worship, can you at the very least tell me if you're using worship as a noun or a verb? Is this something that just is because NASA's there? Or is this something that we're actively having to do? And after 10 minutes, it turns out he doesn't know what the definition of a noun or a verb are. So, yeah, that was infuriating.
Yeah, it was deliciously fruitless. But I did find out that he was, because I asked about these questions, I wanted to figure out what in his head his landscape of the Earth was, and he was exceptionally vague on that, about what he thought about planets and the like, and they're just kind of vague light bulbs in the sky, that the Earth is 6,000 years old. We discovered that he was a Muslim who had converted from apparently creationist Christianity to a creationist Islam, which he puts him kind of out of the ballpark even on that front. So he's a smorgasborder. That's the ones that pay picky choosy, and they come up with their own shtick. And I'd love to see what was the other one that I wanted to ask him on that he puts up a source on. But the moon ride really gotta say, well, not because I haven't even heard that trope anywhere. Same thing with the dinosaurs are fake trope.
What about the 90
There's another one
feet,
that's basically
the 90 feet tall Adam and Eve?
Oh, that's it. Yes, the 90-foot Adam and Eve. I'm just thinking of the square cube law and King Kong. I'm going, oh, there is an area you do not want to go to. And so I've never even heard of Nephilim pushies trying to argue that you've got people that big. I mean, they might go 12 feet, but 90 feet, oh dear, this requires bone structures and things. No, this is not going to work here. So I think he's making up shit in his own little fantasy world. And then he goes back and there's a room full of cats.
I mean, don't get me... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say Adam would have a really big dong then, and I don't think they made leaves that big back then.
I also see that Nathan is here from who was on Ideology earlier. How's it going, Nathan?
Doing great. So I heard this is the Flat Earth discussion group, right?
This is more the therapy group. After the Flat Earth discussion,
yeah,
this is where we
I summarize
recovery.
We're all flat earthers here, so you're in good.
Nathan, we had with TomTom, who is a Christian Islamic young Earth creationist flat earther who believes the Earth is a trans-dimensional kind of Mobius strip thing of indeterminate size, and that all physics work is wrong, and that NASA faked the moon landing by having Stanley Kubrick film it, because he can tell that because there was a picture of a rocket on a coat that was worn by one of the child actors in The Shining.
Is it complete and utter numpty?
Yeah.
Yeah, the way I described it to him is that it's as if he was trying to do math, but instead of drawing 2 + 2 on a sheet of paper and then doing math from there like a normal human being, he was banking on one of his neighbors a couple miles away, just doing the same math problem and having a 2 written down, stealing their paper, coming back home, and then doing his math with their 2.
Have you guys seen the video that Adam Ruins Everything did about the moon landing?
Yes.
Where
the shadows.
He broke it down in such a way where he's like, in order to get the shadows at this angle with this brightness, like the technology that it would have required at the time to film it would have cost more than actually going to the moon.
Yeah.
And I know how difficult it was to do 2001. And one of the things that's so remarkable about the anal retentive Stanley Kubrick is that all the optical shots were done hand matted, because there was no way of doing optical mats in the normal way without having little blurry edges and the like. So he literally had them do frame by frame by frame by frame by frame every single effing mat. And that's why all the shots are spectacular to this day because they were all done one frame at a time. That's Stanley Kubrick. And the idea that this guy would have stayed mum about filming the moon landing is just gobsmacking.
Not to mention, it's insanity to me that a flat earther's best friend in experimentation is the laser, right? Because the laser over a couple miles can determine that the Earth is definitely flat. We hear that all the time. Yet apparently when we take the same type of laser and fire it at the moon, that's not evidence that we landed on it.
I just bring something up about the Stanley Kubrick thing. Like, if he had the ability to hide something so significant as faking the moon landing, wouldn't he be able to hide the other bullshit that, you know, his history?
Also,
it just doesn't make sense.
Also, apparently the chat is rallying to hear from they.
Actually, I wanted to interject one thing, James. There is an entire movement of people that are in the flat Earth community that believe the giants, which were also the Nephilim, were the ones that cut down the giant trees. And the giant trees are thought to be, what are they, the mesas?
Devil's Tower? Things like that.
Yes,
I've seen a little bit of them. They're an interesting bunch, and I get that Nephilim sub-branch of modern creationism will bump into those flat earther types. You'll also bump into the Zecharia Sitchin set, so that's sliding off into ancient astronaut lore. So you get a weird feed. Been around for quite some time. This stuff was starting to gestate back in the 1980s and 90s. And you still find it circulating in, Graham Hancock, that branch of things. And there's this weird cross-fertilization of stupid that is in its little hermetically sealed world compared to the actual anthropology and the actual paleo stuff where they're working through to find out what people were actually doing and digging up the deposits and working out all the cultures and that. And it's like night and day when you're looking at this stuff.
But have you actually run into the unbelievable level of stupid that comes with those giant trees and the Nephilim? They actually believe that the sand that is on our beaches is fucking sawdust.
Discounting how sawdust works in literally every other situation.
Any of those. I have lived a sheltered life of only encountering about 4,000 people on the Twitter feeds and all the rest, which I keep track of in my little spreadsheets and that because I don't want to lose track of what everyone does. And I have not bumped into one of those. I count myself lucky.
They get much worse than that. They get much worse than that. I actually have a video coming up here relatively soon. I'm sorry, I'm going to shout out my channel, sir. So hope you don't mind.
That's fine. You shout out your channel all you want. I love your channel.
So I have a new series coming up, which is going to be called Fireside Chats with They, which I intend to platform scientists, knowledgeable people, things of that nature. And I have a geologist in the community that is going to come up and debunk all of this stuff with a tremendous amount of wonderful information. But the video that we have decided to debunk actually is showing culverts from almost satellite images as being leaves of these giant trees, which, based on the stumps that they're claiming, stretched way past the ISS.
Oh my, isn't that fascinating? And the weird thing about that is that it's not connected to any actual religious tradition. It's just, we're seeing something that's metastasizing in our time.
That's one of those things I wish I had known about that, because then I might have been able to beat Ayn Rand when I had him on my channel with the "Did you pull that religious claim out your ass" game.
Exactly.
Because he would have said that one's definitely pulled out of your ass, and I would have pointed into them and go, "No, it's not."
From a sociological point of view, this is really useful because you're seeing in real time a new branch of stupid materializing, and you can actually trace who's doing it and saying it and how it's popular and all the rest stuff. So if anybody wants to keep like documentation of like how many views their videos have and who connects up with what and what commentaries going on in that actually would be a historically source methods approach useful in understanding the connection networks that happen as you can see this new blip pop up in the Wu land.
It's actually, I agree with that 100%, and it would be extremely interesting to kind of track it down and see. Oh, I don't know, maybe a study of how stupid moves through the Wu land.
Oh yeah, this is really relevant. I don't follow the flat earthers, but I do follow anti-evolutionism and its attendant formats. And I do the same bits of when I'm bumping into like Dinesh D'Souza people, and somebody then will come in, and then I ask the question I intended to ask, but was waiting for the right moment, is I go, oh gosh, since so many Trump supporters are young earth creationists and are climate change skeptics, what are your views on evolution and climate science? That's what I actually wanted to know, to measure at the real source level what their dynamics are. And you find that there's a very monotonous, continuous structure on that. I'll just point out that I can tell you as an authoritative smartass that having measured some 8,000 anti-evolution sources written by 2,300 people over the last years and sorted out all their source citations, which are currently a little over 3,000 out of a data field of 25,000, that 95% of anti-evolutionists do not cite primary source data, and the entire field of anti-evolutionism is missing 90% of the data.
And that is one of the reasons why I like having RJ, because he has the TIP project, and anybody who has the ability to be a patron of RJ, please do so, because we need more funding behind the TIP project. Just saying. That's a thing that's very important.
Yeah, and it allows me to target in a way that wouldn't before, because when you see what material is brought up and what isn't, then you can start realizing, why aren't they thinking about this? And how do they deal with that? So that's why I wrote Slam Dunk, because it's about the reptile-mammal transition. It suddenly dawned on me, why aren't they discussing the reptile-mammal transition? Why aren't we discussing the reptile-mammal transition? And so I generate the book. I catalog all examples of anti-evolutionists on it. And now we got it. We got the brick.
Yep. And on top of that, I'm confused. I'm not necessarily confused, but I've noticed that Frustrated Atheist has decided to disappear or pass out or whatever he has managed to do. And he was one of the ones who straight up called for us to have the after show.
Yeah,
I'll get him on that.
We would like to have you here, but he may be it's 11 o'clock here, so it may be even still later there. Some people actually do sleep.
What is a
No, he might
sleep?
be working though.
What is a sleep? I do a channel and a full-time job. I have no idea what a sleep is. Don't use that word.
I have a full-time job. I just don't get paid for it.
So not gonna lie, when you said trying to figure out how the stupid moves through the woo, for some reason that just sounded like a Holy Kool-Aid video to me. Just like I can imagine Thomas making a video about how stupid moves through the land of woo. It sounds.
Well, I hope everybody in this bunch adopts that methods approach on things and makes attention that not only do you want to deal with the data floor, you want to deal with that source methods issue. That very few people invent things out of thin air. So the fact that most people are copying somebody else's stupid and never checking it is typical. But once in a while, you get these weird things like these 90-foot giants chopping down volcanic trees and making sawdust that looks like sand. That stuff is a new trope. It's not something that's in the creationist lore. It's invented out of thin air, and we're literally watching that occur in real time. So let's document it. Otherwise, it's going to be ephemeral and no one's going to be able to pin it down.
Well, partially, but it's kind of evolved to that point because the whole trope with like giants walking among us and being on Earth, like that goes all the way back to the Old Testament. That goes back to the Nephilim. That goes back to Goliath and the Bible. And I remember even, as a kid having young Earth creationist textbooks that would have pictures of giants being unearthed and being dug up. And it was always, complete bogus stuff, but, forged photographs and whatnot.
That's
but this stuff is
I'd love to see
and it has
a bit on the giants in the textbook aspect, because I haven't spotted that in the more recent material. And so if you got some sources on that, I want to know that.
Is that from A. Becca?
I don't know if A. Becca or Bob Jones or where, I don't know if it was, thinking back, I don't know if it was actually in homeschooling textbooks or if it was additional supplemental stuff on Christian.
So you get this side trope. You get this penumbra of additional material, And we have to remember there's kind of pecking orders in creationism. You got the sciencey types up at Institute for Creation Research and Answers in Genesis. And then you have the bottom feeders operating at the Kent Hovind level. And that connects up with Karl Baugh and the ones, those are the ones that are still pushing the Paluxy tracks, and that we found Ron Wyatt's Exodus chariots out in the middle of the Red Sea. That operates at a much lower level, and very little of that percolates up into the official Andrew Snelling level of creationism. So by knowing what tropes they bring up, you can often peg into what networks they're running off of. And of course, I love Kent Hovind. The moment you mention him, you instantly peg where they're coming from.
Yeah, but they pick and choose, because you'll have creationists who are, you know, old earth creationists that might buy into still like the miracles of Jesus, or they might buy into other supernatural claims. And then you might have some that who say that they're not young earth creationists, but they still believe in you know, giants, and they still believe that the Jews built the pyramids and all that. You know,
Ben Carson is an example, because Ben Carson, although he's a Seventh-day Adventist, I think, his views don't really reflect Seventh-day Adventism. He's more of a smorgasborder, make it up as he goes along. And that's the phenomenon that we're seeing in an awful lot of people in the social media that do videos. They kind of latch onto a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here, and they concoct their own little comfortable little bit. And then as social networks cross-fertilize one another. So what we would be viewing when we're analyzing their source base and their social network, we're seeing that weird endosymbiotic surge process real time. It can be annoying and weird, but at the same time instructive to see how things percolate through and how particular terminology does, and what is the little weirdness of the day tropes that pop up. And so Twitter and Facebook postings and the various comments on the videos that are put up, these are useful little measures that we're doing the non-Lord's work here, kids.
Now I'm actually curious. I see that Nathan is sitting there kind of silently nodding during this, but not.
Yeah. I'm just listening contently.
Fair enough. That's what I was doing for the last 2.5 hours. Although I think the word content wouldn't be the one that I was using. No, during that entire conversation, I was just going, wait a minute. Like, there were some claims that I'd heard before, and so I was like, okay, we're going through the flat Earth script. And then we got to the 90-foot-tall giants.
Adam and Eve.
And once we got there...
that was where I was lost too.
Yeah.
Cirrus, is this your first time having flat earthers on your channel?
This is the first time having flat earthers on my channel live.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not the first time I've dealt with flat earthers, both in video response format and in live discussion, but it's the first time doing it on my channel.
So were these like nobody flat earthers?
I haven't done a video with one before.
So apparently I thought this was a nobody flat earther at first. It was Tom or something Tom. Again, I'm sure Drew is going to be in the chat and going to correct me on it again because I forgot his name again. But this particular flat earther I thought was a nobody because I tried to get a few on that had been on non-sec before, but no emails came back. So I was like, okay, this is fine. Multi-Tom is his name. Thanks, Kyle.
Multi-Tom.
Yes, Multi-Tom. The O's are zeros. He's got a small channel, 188 people, or 188 subs, and he's got no social media, apparently, because to him, social media is BS. I guess that's how you reinforce the echo chamber, is removing ability for anybody else to speak with you. But apparently, he's very vocal in a lot of UK-based flat Earth groups. So, and they're groups that some of my viewers apparently were in. So they recognized the name, and they said this is the first time they had ever heard his voice, because typically he's just spouting flat Earth memes in groups. So apparently this was a decently well-known in a small niche circle flat Earther, but still definitely not a flat Earther I had ever heard of.
You know who I'd recommend you bring on for a flat Earth debate? You ever heard of a guy called David Deese?
David Deese?
Yeah.
I have not heard about it.
Vaguely rings a bell. I don't remember. I think Cy Strike's bunch probably would be able to say more about him right off the bat.
He's a conspiracy.
The names come up.
He's a conspiracy theorist who used to work, doing artwork for Sesame Street and Disney, but then he got really into like 9/11 truth stuff. And he essentially absorbs every conspiracy theory imaginable and makes Photoshop images supporting flat Earth and other conspiracy theories. So I think he'd be an interesting guy to dissect.
How do you spell his last name? Is it Deese?
It's David
Dees, isn't it?
Dees. Yeah, he has a website with all his Photoshop work and stuff.
All right, I have that.
The name rings a bell. I don't know. I don't have my reference notes up, so I can't check to find out whether I've got him in my spreadsheet or not.
Yeah, I have.
Call it a night, guys. Have a good night.
That's perfectly fine, Blue. I'll see you later. But yeah, I think so. David Deese is somebody who I've not heard of, but I have him written down in my notes now. So it'll be somebody that I check into and see about seeing about having on. I don't want to do a whole lot of flat Earth discussion on my channel because I say that, but I have an entire series called Dangers of Woo. So I say I don't want to have flat Earth discussion on my channel, but that literally falls into the category of a video series I make. I feel conflicted now. I feel like I had Anthony. I feel like I had Anthony Magnabosco. Oh, go on.
The fact that flat earthers are so trivial in the bigger social context makes them a niche thing to look at from a methods point of view. But your more mainstream creationist and anti-evolution movement actually affects policies inadvertently because people who believe that way are in government and making decisions. So that really matters in a way that so far flat earthers are just a weird little thing going on the internet.
Yeah, they're really prolific on the internet right now, and I kind of want them to become a dying trend. But at the same time, Delano TV has over 500,000 subscribers. I don't know how to feel about that.
Freaking Christ.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting in if space tourism actually builds up and we eventually have the Orion space plane and space stations and all the rest where people are just going to the moon routinely, it's going to make it progressively more awkward for your nutball neighbor next door to grump on about how impossible the moon landing was when people were taking selfies at the Apollo 11 memorial crater.
So the issue with that, though, and the reason I don't think that's going to stop anything, is because this is an actual conversation I had that got me kicked out of a Flat Earth Facebook group that I was in for a little bit. It was in that group for obvious reasons. It's fun and entertaining to listen to the nonsense, and there's always the ability to be outside of an echo chamber and look at the other side's arguments, as ridiculous as they are. So I'm sitting inside in the group, and one person makes the Antarctic Treaty claim, the claim that we can't go to Antarctica, we can't go to the South Pole, etc. And so I linked them to a website that actually sells tours that will take you for about $2,500 US. They'll take you to Antarctica and they'll do a tour to the South Pole to you, tour there and back. And I said, here's a website. If you've got a couple $1,000s to drop, here's a vacation you can take, and it will take you to the South Pole. And you know what? If you're going to assert a claim is true, wouldn't you want to know? Wouldn't you want to know that your claim is actually true? And the first response I got was the person going, no, hell no. Why would I want to go to Antarctica? It's too cold.
There you go. Oh, that's so sweet.
Now, don't get me wrong. And I'm listening to this person. I'm like, so I'm an atheist who would love to see whether or not a God truly exists or not, even if it means that I might have to face some horrible consequences if that God is actually real. I would love to find out the validity of that claim 100% outside of, philosophical discussion. I would love that. But yet, apparently something as trivial as going to a sheet of ice at the bottom of our planet is too much for a flat earther, even though there's proof that we can go there and proof people have been there and pictures of people who have been to the pole and back. That's why, because people like that exist, and it was that conversation that got me kicked out of that group, because people like that exist, I can only assume that even if we had people on the moon taking selfies on the moon and coming back, they would just be seen as more propaganda.
They'll say that they're all government agents.
Yeah, no amount of evidence can persuade them.
It's because they have an emotional connection. They don't want to learn. They just want to have this attachment to this this feeling they get from believing things and think that they're the enlightened people.
Yeah, and we actually have science we have science behind the whole conspiracy theorist debate, where I believe there's actually evidence that there's a certain amount of dopamine that releases when you feel like you are part of one of the enlightened few on any particular topic.
I was actually a conspiracy theorist when I was about 14 years old. I believed the vaccines cause autism stuff. I believe in 9/11 truth, and you kind of feel like you're part of an elite group when you are part of that.
I was a young Earth creationist.
Yeah.
I was a young Earth creationist and a 9/11 truther. Those were two things that I was.
I have a skeleton
really?
in my closet
Wow.
too. Back in the early 1970s, I was a Velikovskyan. How many of those? How many do you remember what that is?
No clue.
I don't know what that
He's
is.
still Emanuel Velikovsky wrote a book in 1950, Worlds in Collision, that caused a big flurry because he argued that the planet Venus had been expelled as a comet from Jupiter only 1,500 years ago, and that a bunch of catastrophes had happened on the Earth, and the solar system had moved around, and all of this was in that time frame, only 1,500 BC, and it caused a giant kerfuffle. And there was a revival of people who were saying that Velikovsky was actually right in the mid-1960s, and I just happened to be hitting college at the time and read Worlds in Collision on the summer before I went to college. And so for a few years, I was a Velikovsky, and I even went down to when the AAAS at their San Francisco meeting in 74 or 5 had a special session that was on the Velikovsky controversy, and Carl Sagan came in and all that, and they had a bunch of talks back and forth. Later on, as I began to become more savvy on methods and all that, I figured out how I'd had my head up my ass. And so it was a very useful learning experience for me to figure out why I had managed to believe what the things I'd done. But yeah, you get a sense of, imagine how it is when you have the true new thing and everybody else is wrong, but you have the secret nugget, and it gives you an exhilarating sense of being on the vanguard of a new revolution. And that's a very exhilarating thing.
Well, I think the issue really stems because there's no issue with saying, oh, there's a conspiracy behind something like 9/11. There's no issue with that, because at that point you're going, hey, there's something I don't know. That's cool. Not knowing things is fine. What's not fine is the other half that happens with conspiracy theories, where you start asserting what you think or what you will say you know is the end result of the things you don't know, and it's all stemming from a claim of something you don't know. If I say we as the lay public don't know everything behind the JFK assassination, that is true because we do not have the report. I cannot then say, because we don't know, it is insert any one of random conspiracy theories about the grassy knoll. You can't then do that. But that's the problem with conspiracy theory, is that it then does that.
Yeah. I blame they.
The fun thing that we moved on about the Kennedy assassination is we now have digital technology. And so they've been able to digitally recreate Dealey Plaza. We can see the trajectories of the bullets. We can figure out, oops, the idiot Garrison managed to mislocate where the drop seat was on the Lincoln. So we had McConnell in the wrong spot. And again, you discover, oh, yeah, the bullet that went down from Oswald's gun went right through Kennedy McConnell. And that it would be physically impossible for that trajectory not to have gone through Kennedy's brain because he was in the way. There was no way around it. And so all that stuff, the supposedly wandering bullet isn't wandering at all. It's just a straight line shot. And so the technology moves on, but yet you don't find that translated into the secondary source addicts. So your Kennedy assassination groupies and your flat earthers and your young earth creationists and your moon landing hoaxers, often whom can cross-fertilize, all of them at source methods level are doing the same thing wrong. They're relying on a limited data field. They can't conceptualize what they really think happened. They're certain of what they didn't want to have happen, but they have no criteria for changing their mind. They don't fact check their secondary sources. They don't look at primary source data. And it's this cycle. And we were encountering that with TomTom in a highly distilled, dense form, but it's exactly the same thing.
Also, it sounded like Holy Kool-Aid wanted to say something just a second ago.
Well, I was just saying that I used to, when I was 17, first year in college, I believed that Area 51 was the government covering up aliens that had visited us. And there were all these videos on YouTube that just, it was a
blows your mind.
Yeah. And, I had a few people kind of, laugh at me and then show me that like some of the clips were taken from the movie Signs. Before I realized that, and it was embarrassing at the time, but I'm really glad that I was called out and that there was a little bit of mockery involved, because it made me be a little bit more careful and more cautious with what I just took it point blank, but there was this feeling of, you know, I'm a part of something. I have the secret knowledge. The stupid thing is that as many dumb people as there are out there, if you actually know how science works, in a way, you do have access to special knowledge. It's just available to everyone.
The Roswell case is so delicious. There was that analysis that was done by that Air Force guy fairly recently for me. I think it was like in maybe the 1990s. So I mean, that shows you how long ago my time frame is. But it's a classic of source methods analysis and the limitations of memory, because there was a particular piece of information that came up where this guy had worked as a funeral at a funeral parlor. And he swore up and down in the 1980s that he had seen the little bodies from the aliens, from the crash saucer, that were put in little body bags that were carried through their funeral parlor back in 1947. And when the guy analyzed the statements, this is exactly like the things you find in religious apologetics, is that the guy wasn't lying, but his memory had played tricks on him, because he vividly described how the commander of the base had red hair. That was not true in 1947, but it was true in 1959. He talked about seeing black Air Force officers, not the case in 1947, but definitely so in 1959, when the B-52 crashed and the bodies were so burned that the little bodies were put inside of little body bags and carried to that very place. They could document what had happened. His mind had conflated an incident from 1959 with 1947. And because he, as an old man, when he was being interviewed in the 1980s, was suddenly important and people were paying attention to him. And so he builds a construct where at no point was he lying, but his recollection wasn't true.
That's a great way of explaining it too, because that is so frequent that happens.
But some people don't want to admit that their mind may play tricks, and they think that their mind is impervious to such kind of delusions like that. And they feel offended
and
by
yet the memory rewires. I had a weird example that took place, maybe it's been about 2 years ago or so. I'm a great murder mystery fan, and I adore the Thin Man movies. And I had vividly remembered seeing an old Thin Man movie where Nick Charles had been hit in the ass with a bullet, and he was spending most of the movie sitting on a damn rubber donut. And his wife, Myrna Loy, was constantly chiding him about it. And I vividly remembered the scene at the kitchen table where they were talking, and he had his donut underneath him. And then he finally gets cured, and he gets another ass shot at the end. And there at the end of the movie, he's down with the donut again. And so when finally the Thin Man movies came out on DVD, I'm going, yay, and I'm looking forward to see the donut movie. No donut movie.
That doesn't exist.
6 movies. Doesn't exist. And I go, wait a minute, I vividly remember that movie. Well, then I thought maybe there was another movie with Myrna Loy and William Powell playing a husband and wife detective team, but not that. And so I hunted around for there, because there were often where they would make the same kind of a movie with a different plot and same. Nope, couldn't find a damn thing. By weird coincidence, only like a month later, Turner Classic Movies played a movie with Rosalind Russell and Robert Montgomery about a husband and wife detective team who had been hit in the ass with a bullet, and he had a rubber donut that he sat on. That was the movie that I had remembered as a 12-year-old. But what had happened was interesting. A, it was not William Powell and Myrna Loy. My memory had reconstructed completely different actors into my memory that were not in the original, and there was no kitchen table scene. I had constructed in my memory a completely imaginary set of film footage that I could remember as vividly as if I had seen it for real. And yet I know empirically that's what my little brain had done. I can't imagine the people building up the supposed resurrection of Jesus, or the things where they're seeing miracles and all that, that same process has to have been going on over and over and over again with people all through history.
It's like when
Have you heard of the Mandela effect?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
I was going to say, this is kind of like a prime example of what people call the Mandela effect, where they, instead of say, oh, my mind played tricks on me, they say, oh, I'm living in a different dimension now. And in the other dimension, that story was true about getting shot in the ass, but in this dimension, it's now a different version of a film.
It was the Berenstain ass shot instead of the Berenstain ass shot.
Exactly.
Yeah. And at that point, you just might as well flash Tortugan alert and move on.
I love
how they're.
Sorry, Thomas. I need to run along, but it has been good to talk to all of you. Some of you, most of you, first time I've talked to you. Thanks for inviting me, Cyrus.
Anytime.
I will talk to some of you later. Hopefully, I get to talk to some of you again. Good night.
Keep us informed about what they are doing.
Tune into my channel anytime.
Yeah, everybody sub today.
Yeah, for anybody who hasn't seen Thay's channel, he targets and takes down conspiracy theory really well. And since I started watching his videos, I've really enjoyed his channel.
Yeah, you run through conspiracies very easily. There's a brand new paper in PNAS on how children adopt false beliefs based on their parentage, and there's stuff on the biological roots of this in the primates. It's a huge, for PNAS, it's actually quite a long paper. It's typically, they usually run about 5 pages. I think this is like 7 or 8. And it's open access in the current edition of PNAS. So you can go there and glom onto that if you want to have some of the actual sciencey stuff. Ah, Civil War General McCrae.
Hey, I can't talk loud. I just want to drop in for a minute to kind of add something to the Velikovsky thing, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I actually read Worlds in Collision 2 when I was in high school. I at the time when I read Worlds in Collision, I kind of blinded to a little bit as well. I wasn't Velikovskyan, but people don't realize is Velikovsky was a very brilliant man. He was just wrong.
Yeah.
He wasn't like a nutter. There was a whole process called the Velikovsky affair that RJ was referring to, where there's a lot of scientists that got together. That were
what's his name? Can't remember the goddamn name now. I met him.
They were. You talking about
Shapley? He autographed my copy of Ages and Chaos.
Yeah, a guy named Shapley was against him. And
Carlo Shapley. Yeah, he was a brilliant, and Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, who I disliked at the time because she was a critic of Velikovsky, but now she was one of the pioneer woman astronomers. I go, oh God, I was a prick to have the bad opinions I had of her.
But a lot of criticism they leveled against him, I think, were kind of unjust. I think the whole Velikovsky affair was kind of unjust. Now, granted, he was wrong, but he was going by what he thought of at the time. And so the book isn't that great. I'm not going to. I mean,
well,
it had a lot
from a source methods direction. Velikovsky disintegrates.
Yeah, I mean, I think he at the time, and this was written back in the 50s, right? I mean, the catastrophic
1950 for that, and Ages and Chaos in 55, and then he went off on a thing where he's trying to reconstruct the entire Egyptian history, Ages and Chaos, and that he was spending on until he died.
But catastrophism and uniformitarianism was still at the point where they had not settled which one they were going to go with. But back then, catastrophe theory was a prevalent model that they used in the development of continents and of the planets as well. But I think he took that and he kind of ran with it in a way based upon his understanding of celestial mechanics and his understanding of what we know now as plate tectonics. And so he wrote this book. And one of the things he did say was like Venus was actually a comet that had left Jupiter. But he based upon this stuff upon misinformation that he thought of. But I would never put him, and even Gould would say this before he passed, that he would not put Velikovsky in some kind of crank position.
Yeah, he was
an actual scientist.
Impressed a lot of people.
Yeah.
The thing that the blip of information that impressed me most, and when I found out why it didn't impress me, was also extremely important, is the thing that in Ages and Earth and Upheaval that was the most amazing detail that I thought supported catastrophism is that there was an ice age in India, and that the ice age started at the tip of India and moved northward. And I thought, wow, that's weird. How can an ice age go from the equator north? And then as the big plate tectonic revolution came along in the 1970s, and it became obvious that when India had its ice age, it wasn't in the northern hemisphere. It was parked in the southern hemisphere down by Antarctica during the Silurian. And so the ice age was starting at the pole and moving northward away from the pole, exactly as you would expect. And when I realized how all of that argument that he had scavenged old material and he had done little blips, and he used George McCready Price, who was the guy that led off into young Earth creationism, that there was such weird little cherry picking that he backed himself up into a corner. And the other thing that really convinced me that Velikovsky was not on the level is that I remember vividly when I was there, although hopefully this is not a memory quite like the rubber donut one, but it was at the San Francisco at the hotel there on Union Square, St. Francis. And there was the meeting afterwards, and Velikovsky was signing various autographed copies of his book, and he was asking questions of things. And I remember this old geezer who was probably about my age now, back then in 1975, and he was clearly a Velikovskyan, but he raised his hand and wanted to ask his opinion about plate tectonics, this now fabulous revolution that was just starting up in the 1970s. And the response that Velikovsky had was so dismissive, so flippant, so like just, oh, it doesn't mean a damn thing. It doesn't affect anything. That at that point, that was the seed of the nugget that said, I need to rethink this and look back at his argument more carefully. And that ultimately was the thing. Nothing Carl Sagan said or Jastrow or anything else had as much impact as that dismissive flip that he gave to that poor guy in the audience about plate tectonics.
Well, everything Velikovsky wrote was predicated on a type of catastrophe. I mean, even the interactions.
Oh, yeah.
That's the whole thing. I mean, he believed very strongly that there was an interaction between Mars and Venus and other planets early on in the solar system that led to major changes on the Earth. And made
you still find a tiny cadre of Velikovskians to this day. They're usually on the fringe.
They're like the Ayn Rands of philosophy. You know, you find
they're diehard bunches. I loved. Oh, and Stephen Talbot. I don't know if you've heard of the New Atlantis magazine. It's a website that's kind of wooish and vaguely anti-evolution, kind of Christian-y. It's a weird little amalgamation. I knew Steve Talbot. I was his assistant down in his brother put up a little magazine, Pensée, that was a big Velikovskyan thing at this little Portland University in the 1970s. And I was down there for a summer as their research assistant. And so I met him. I knew exactly the kind of wackaloon viewpoints that actually he ends up still having. So he's still an active figure. His brother, I think, is off the field, but Stephen Talbot is still a busy little beaver.
Yeah. Anyways, I meant to put that Velikovsky to science was like Ayn Rand to philosophy, kind of objectivism. You know, you still find a few objectivists, but anyways, I just want to throw that out there. People don't get too hard pressure.
I think Ayn Rand is more influential in active purposes than Velikovsky ever was. And Rand was a fascinating character because she was both brilliant and talented and colossally arrogant and annoying. And so there's little bits and pieces of her interesting. At the same time, you want to just bang your head against the wall with some of the abrupt arguments that she makes. If you want to get a capsule view of her viewpoints, watch The Fountainhead, because she wrote the damn screenplay for it, and it conveys her philosophy in a nutshell. And you can see all the stuff that's interesting about it and all the stuff that's stupid about it, all in the same box. Silence.
Yeah. we just wait for the train to stop for a second.
Yeah, a bunch of two old farts talking about something none of you know anything about.
No, I've heard of Ayn Rand before. I know that for one thing, she was an atheist, although I don't think most people in the modern atheist movement would like her very much, because she had a very, I guess you could say, selfish view of how things should be ordered.
Nate, I hear this is a scientifically proven, and I hate the word proven, but in this case it's apt, scientific method for insomnia. Listen to a Nephilim Free video while reading Atlas Shrugged. You'll be asleep within 5 minutes.
Yeah, I've never done that, but I really can recommend King Vidor's a film version of The Fountainhead, because first of all, it's not a bad movie. It's quite good. It's well paced. She wrote the screenplay on it, and it sums up perfectly her prickly little philosophy, because it's about a kind of a Frank Lloyd Wright style architect who wants to do his own thing no matter what. And he bucks up against the fuddy-duddies that want to make old-fashioned architecture, and he is a steadfast representative of his own way, and he's going to do what he wants no matter what. And in the course of things, where he has this love affair with this woman, in fact, they had a physical love affair. The actual actress left her husband to have a shack up with Gary Cooper, who was playing Rourke, the character in there. So there was a controversy to it. And King Vidor, who was a masterful filmmaker and a control freak, was running into Ayn Rand, the control freak, because she literally had it in her contract. She had total control over what was presented in that movie. He could not change a word of her script without her permission. She was just like Rourke, who in the plot of the story makes a deal with this scuzzbucket little architect to use one of his designs because he's been blacklisted. So the scuzzbucket architect decides to agree to build this building that Rourke had designed, but put his name on it. And in the course of this, the various cabal force him to put all sorts of pedigree, filigrants, and all sorts of details on it. And therefore, the architect Rourke is pissed off because his work has been compromised. So he goes out in the dead of the night and dynamites the buildings. And so he's now, the culmination of the scene is this big trial scene where he is explaining why he did this and what the creativity of man is and how the individual creative spirit is. And this is pure condensed Ayn Rand. And it goes on for quite a long time. And Vidor was bored with it. He wanted to cut the damn scene down. She refused. She absolutely invoked her contract. So the version of the thing we see in the movie is exactly what Ayn Rand intended you to see. And it conveys, in a nutshell, you watch that last 20-minute scene. It's riveting. It's thought-provoking. It's fascinating. Lots about it you will agree with, that there's no such thing as the collective mind, and the individual creates because they want to create stuff. At the same time, then, when you know about Ayn Rand and how she was boinking the husbands of her various woman assistants and double standards on when they were having affairs, and her life was just a weird mess of hedonism. But yet you can also compare that to the end sequence in The Fountainhead, and it'll save you the chance of reading all of her damn books.
Well, I will check that out then, because I'd like to kind of get into her mind and figure out what she believes.
I actually
it's got a rip snorting score by Max Steiner. It's one of his classic scores. Fountainhead is really, there's a scene of where there's this Rourke is having his first sexual encounter without anything actually happening with this architect's the rich person's wife. He's going to eventually build their house, and then this 100-story building in the end of the movie.
RJ, the chat is telling you to breathe.
Okay, well, I can breathe and talk at the same time. Anyway, there's a scene where Steiner does one of his masterpiece of music to convey the sensuality of Rourke and the woman having this like sexual tension that's going on in the course of them looking at each other, and no dialogue going on. It's just sweat underneath on this hot day in this rock quarry, and it's a fabulous example of Max Steiner as a film composer, to be able to convey back context musically. Pause for breath.
Here we are. This is the reason why we have to get RJ a better fidelity mic, because if we know that we're going to be listening to a lot of RJ anytime he's here, it better be RJ in stereo.
stereo. Oh, trivial question. What was the movie that caused every movie to go into stereo?
No clue. I'm drawing a blank. Google time.
Stereophonic sound was first being used in movies in the early 1950s, and there was a rage of it, but it was expensive and troublesome, and most studios didn't much like it. And so by the mid-1960s, they were pulling away from it. There were still movies made in stereo, but one movie came out that instantly forced everybody to switch to stereo, and that is Star Wars. And after Star Wars, no, you could not do a movie without Dolby Surround.
You know, that kind of makes sense, considering that Star Wars was a standard maker for a lot of movies at the time. I remember actually when I got my first set, unfortunately, it was one of the special effects editions of the original trilogy. I actually had it actually came with a DVD that was the making of Star Wars. And I don't have the DVD anymore because apparently back when I was in high school, a friend of mine needed to borrow it because he had an entire project on the making of Star Wars. And he said, "Hey, do you have anything I can use?" He didn't have a computer at home. So I was like, "Yeah, I have this DVD that has like a lot of the information, but it's incredibly biased, but it's here." And he's like, "Sure, I'll use that." And then I just never saw it again. It's gone.
Yeah, one of the weirdest examples of a movie that should have been in stereo but wasn't because they were in the era when they should have done this was Conan the Barbarian, the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger. That was one of Basil Polidoros' magnificent scores, and it's co-written by Oliver Stone. I mean, it's way more interesting a movie than it had any right to be. But the studio would not pump out the extra money to do it in stereo. And that was a quantity of money. $50,000 was the amount of money that it would have taken them to make it in stereo.
for movie standards, that's not a lot.
Even in 1980s, it wasn't a lot.
Yeah, for movie standards, that's more than an actor's salary.
Still talking $20–30 million movies by that time. If we go farther back, the Mount Olympus of money that spent on a movie has to be Cleopatra. that practically bankrupted 20th Century Fox. My God, that movie was cost $42 million in 1962, and that was when $42 million was $42 million. So it'd be easily, 150 million or more by modern day standards. But if it hadn't been for Sound of Music that came along in 1965, there might not be a 20th Century Fox, because they almost bankrupted the studio.
Yeah, but you got to admit, Elizabeth Taylor looked amazing in that movie.
Oh God, she was superb. She never liked the movie. She didn't like doing it. The only reason she did it is because they came to her and offered her this film because she really wasn't interested in it. And they said, she said, okay, you got to pay me $1 million and you got to film it in Todd AO, which is the film process that her husband had developed, and he died by that time. She had the rights to it, and they said, okay. So that's why Cleopatra's in Todd AO.
She was
CinemaScope.
Some of those older people in movies, the actresses, I mean, they were just stunningly beautiful. Just
oh God! And there's a very risque scene. She's practically in the buff in that pool scene in there, and there's an awful lot of leg showing on that one. And she was also perfectly cast for it because Cleopatra was intelligent and willful and demanding and ambitious. And Elizabeth Taylor had the perfect qualities to play that, even though she didn't realize it at the time. And then the other one that is just a masterful performance is Rex Harrison's Caesar. I have never seen a Caesar before or since that captures Caesar better, because he has the humor and the gravitas all at the same time. Nobody's come close to him on it. It's worth the 4-hour admission to watch the damn thing.
So, Wotan, I would like to point out that Kyle did send you a message via email, because Wotan, who was the original flat earther that I wanted to have in our discussion, he's in the chat, and he was originally who I wanted to have in before, but you never responded to any of the emails.
I personally sent to Wotan an email, which I checked. He did send it back to me, but my email was I told him, get a hold of you. I don't know why he was getting back to me. I mean, just tell me that he got back to you, but he didn't mention whether he got back to you or not. He said, what his days are free. I'm like, no, my message was contact you. That was what I told him.
Gotcha. Well, I know that Kyle messaged him too on top of that.
I most certainly did message him, so for you, buddy.
Thank you. Well, we ended up getting.
Norse gods sure got wussy.
Apparently, he was busy. Not the best idea to email the day you want to do a guest. Well, see, the thing is that what happened?
It was short notice, sure.
A week and a half ago, there actually was a flat earther we were going to have on, but they ended up bailing out, and then another flat earther who was actually a friend of mine in high school, who apparently became a flat earther. I don't know how that happens. We went to a technical high school, but whatever. He said, okay, I can do it. And I said, can you do it on this date? He said, well, maybe I can do it. And I was like, well, I need a hard yes or a hard no, because I can't run a channel on maybes. I can't.
we need to find more X-flat. I'm more interested in X-flat flat earthers than I am flat earthers. Flat earthers are old news. They're just
actually, that is an interesting.
That is something I would love to see.
What was it that caused them to change their mind? That would be interesting.
And that's what I want to have. That's why I want to find ex-flat earthers. I don't know any. I knew of one that we got. Somebody
Are there any?
There was one that somebody had mentioned to us, but I can't remember their detail. I don't think we were able to track them down. But yeah, if anybody out there knows any ex-flat earthers, let Cyrus and I know, because I would be interested to be a part of that.
Ex-creationists are fairly common, but they do tend to fall into the category of people who were raised as creationists, and then they get out in the big world and discover that they've been sold a bill of goods. Yeah. I think there are far fewer of ones who became creationists as adults and then fell away from it.
But that's why
that's a little bit harder.
But that's why I think most flat earthers are posed. And let me run by the argument. Okay, we know young earth creationists exist, right? We know people actually believe that. I think most people would agree with that premise. We also know that there's a lot of young earth creationists. I mean, we have one in here, obviously. You know, Cyrus was X. Apologia was an X. A lot of them do exist. In fact, we've seen it happen in real time. I've actually, in real time, gotten people to really think about young earth creationism. They come back later. You know what? Shit, you're right. And they have left young earth creationism. It does happen. Now, I've only, in my entire time on YouTube, had one person leave flat earth. But they didn't leave all the rest of the stuff. They still the young earth creationists. They're still 9/11 truther. All the other conspiracy theories, chemtrails. But they left flat earther because of the pole, basically the North and South Pole, celestial pole. They couldn't wrap their head around the stars working properly on a flat Earth. That would, but they were never that attached to it, right? It wasn't their main
Well,
push.
even Kent Hovind can be an anti-flat earther. So there's a dynamic where you can still be a flaming Tortugan, but you compartmentalize stuff.
Sure,
What the interesting issue would be that there's something about that flat Earth model that's so counterintuitively weird today that it requires either a complete Craven Poe or somebody that's got a brain packed in gun cotton, as Tom may have been.
You're gonna have to bear with me a little bit. I'm trying to get the argument out, RG. So
yeah.
Just hang tight. Okay, so we do know those things are true. We don't see a lot of flat earthers that have left a flat Earth. To me, like young Earth creationists realize that at a certain point that it's all bullshit and they leave young Earth creationism. I would think that even if you had a true flat earther, at some point they would have to come to that same realization. Even still, flat Earth is even more demonstrably false than young Earth creationism to some extent. I mean, you have different degrees of bullshit, but I think to me, young Earth creationism is just marginally above flat Earth, barely. Okay, but flat Earth to me is pretty much the bottom of the barrel. So if there are young Earth creationists that realize young Earth creationism is wrong and they leave it, it seems to follow that something that is more demonstrably false would have at least an equal amount or higher amount of people leaving it.
You find that you need to have the category in between, which are the geocentrists. Although not all geocentrists fall into the flat Earth category, virtually all the flat earthers I bumped into are geocentrists. It kind of comes with the territory. And geocentrism has a very long and resilient little subculture that pops up in a bunch of little different subsections. And I don't know a hell of a lot of ex-geocentrists.
I don't know a lot of ex-geocentrists. I mean, obviously, you watched when I was me and Carrie were talking to Rick Delano, right? Did you watch that one?
No.
Okay. Well, Rick Delano and Robert Sungenis are the two leading people for the push for geocentrism. They both produced that movie. They produced the movie The Principle. I think Kara and I did a pretty decent job. There's a couple things I would like to change, but I thought we did a decent job in rebuking him. But geocentrist, the only one that I know that has left geocentrism, believe it or not, is Nephilim Free. He actually, he actually used to be so even
and by the way, geocentrists have an impact that your flat earthers don't, because Ellwanger, who is the guy behind all the legal maneuvering, by the way, so there's an example of geocentric creationism in Roman Catholicism. He was the guy who was behind the major equal time legislation in the 1980s that was spurring forward on creationism, and then moved down to 1999. Tom Willis from this little Midwest Creationist Association that actually wrote the Kansas education standards in 1999 that were knocked down because they were anti-evolutionist. He was okay with geocentrism. So they actually were getting their little mitts on potentially educational system.
I'm actually going to see if I can find some ex-flat earthers through
yeah, I've got a couple for you, Steve.
You know some?
One of them, he has a channel called Tiger Dan 925, and just from kind of a cursory look at it.
That's the one I was actually thinking of that we're trying to get a hold of.
Because he has it's interesting because he actually walked through the process of reasoning his way out of the flat Earth, but then at the same time, like he's still a geocentrist.
Yeah, he was the one I was trying to get a hold of, actually, Tiger Dan, because they had told me that he had actually left. He had a lot of videos back in the day, about flat Earth.
It's fascinating, though, because in his video description, he talks about Bible prophecy, and then he apparently hasn't updated it since 2014, because he talks about how 2014 is going to be the year of reckoning with the mark of the beast.
I like to belong to the Apocalypse of the Month Club. I've been going on for quite a long time.
There's been several apocalypses, though, don't you know? The Jehovah's Witnesses have actually predicted, what, like 12? Something like that?
Yeah. The example you're giving is very, very revealing. And what I would love to do in discussion is this methods approach to find out their source space and thing, because the whole bit behind the Tortugan concept of the mind, this turtle shell mentality, is that they have objects of desire that they latch onto, and they have a mind that can disregard information that doesn't fit with that. So cognitive dissonance is not one of their problems. And clearly that there would be some aspect of flat Earth that if they decide that that's something that they don't want to play with, they're okay with jettisoning that in a way that the geocentrism isn't. And remember, a geocentric thing, you can have the globe Earth and everything is nice and tidy, so you're still seeing the physical universe identical around you, and it's easy to integrate it with that. In a way that flat Earth, you got to start talking about the penguins armed with lasers in order to keep everybody from getting to Antarctica. And it has baggage that maybe they don't feel happy with.
When we couldn't get any flat earthers on, I think it was URJ who said, well, maybe the penguins killed them all finally.
There's another...
Yes, indeed.
Was that Thomas?
In searching through this, I found a video about an ex-flat earther on FES TV, but it looks like the channel itself is like it's in a different language, but this video is in English. So you might be able to...
That's another big issue, is how widespread and what cultures have that. We know that in the case of young Earth creationism, they're all over the place, but the big block and the most influential group are American ones. But then they have influence in Britain and other places where the apologetics of the young Earth creationism then gets copied, metastasized in other contexts. And it'd be fun to do for people who have that anal retentive skill to actually go through and kind of systematize how widespread and what nationalities, what age differences there are. They seem to be a young crowd, although we do bump in. I think the guy we were talking to today, if he was maybe 50 years old, maybe older. What would you think?
He said that he was born in the mid-1960s.
Oh, yes. He mentioned, yes. Yeah, he was just a little bit younger than I am. So that would probably, maybe 60 or late 50s, Less frisky than me, I think.
Yeah. But my point was, you just don't see a lot of ex-flat earthers, and maybe I'll reach out to try to get a hold of Tiger Dan again. But I noticed that two things happen when a person finally realizes that something they promoted a long time is completely fucking wrong, like young Earth creationism. I think the most rational persons tend to reevaluate all their positions. That's why you see a lot of people leaving religion when they find out that young Earth creationism is wrong, right? Not all of them, but many of them do say, you know what, yeah, all that was BS, and therefore maybe what the rest of it is BS. And so you find a lot of young Earth creationists that have left and become atheists. That happens frequently. Some of them do reconcile. They become theistic evolutionists and old Earth creationists. But when it comes to flat earthers, one of two things happen. Either A, they latch on to some other batshit fucking thing like geocentrism, or they well, actually, you know what? That's kind of what they only do. I've never seen
taxonomy. Typically, historically, they would be coming out of a geocentric frame. So this is probably something that they had already latched onto, and they're just abandoning the little side issue. The interesting thing about the ex-geocentrist or the ex-creationist things is that the underlying method doesn't change in their head. They just change what it is they think badly about. And you can still find this. One of the reasons why I'm very leery in all of my writings to deal with Glenn Morton, who is an ex-young Earth creationist, but his brain didn't entirely disconnect because he's also a climate science skeptic. And so he's using the same bad method, but in a very compartmentalized way now, as opposed to the previous version. And if you want a flip side, Ian Plimer, who is an evolutionist geologist from Australia, is a climate science denialist as well. And he's not only not very good at criticizing creationists, he loses law cases with him, but he also wrote one of the most impenetrable climate science denying books that I've ever seen in my life. And so even though people can come up with correct positions in some ways, everything needs to be measured from that source method level. That way we can sort out and not worry about the upper level veneer of content.
There's not an upper level veneer of content when it comes to flat Earth. It's all base level. Let's just admit that.
Oh, I'll agree with that. Yeah, it's all purely secondary. There is no primary source data field to work off of something that is not even slightly true. You can't even put a pedigree back into it.
No, and I think it's very strange to me. So when like I see that Wotan is saying in the chat that there's a good reason you don't see many flat Earth. There's many ex-flat Earthers because flat Earth is the truth. Plenty of ex-globe Earthers though. So this is the thing here though. This is something I said about conspiracy theory earlier, and I think it holds well to flat Earth as well. There's a fundamental difference between saying you don't know this is true, which may or may not be the case, and You don't know this is true, therefore this other thing must be true. Whenever you say, well, you can't prove the Earth is a globe. Okay, that may or may not be the case. I'm willing to grant that it may or may not be the case. I know it isn't the case. I know we can prove the Earth is a globe. But I'm willing to grant, for the sake of conversation, that it may or may not be the case that the Earth is a globe. And what then? How does that then suddenly get you to flat Earth? Also, Thomas, I see that you have yourself as the king of space, and I'm sorry, but you did not win that war. That was all propaganda.
Hey, Zaphod Beeblebrox is the king of the universe.
There can only be one space lord. There's not enough room in space for two of us, Cirrus.
But how did you beat me and Logic and Disappointed Optimist and Cosmological?
Oh, check Twitter. I posted a picture about it.
I saw the picture that showed that you beat us all, but see, I'm claiming that that's just propaganda.
Yeah,
That's
damn it all!
propaganda.
Anybody talking about egos? I'm in the room. I'm not going to give any ground on that.
Repeat anything enough times, and it becomes truth.
All right, Hitler. Take the lie, make it simple, make it big, say it enough times, and they'll believe it.
And then get an overbite. You can call yourself
squirrel.
Dinesh D'Souza.
Cirrus is not a squirrel. How did that even start, by the way? I'm curious. Was it?
Have you looked at yourself?
Well, there's that. But was it Kyle or was it Jimmy? Because it's one of them.
I don't remember.
But it's I almost always hear exclusively from the two of them, or at least mostly from the two of them. And at this point, I have no idea which one it is. Also, hi, Capri. Welcome to the madness that is the chat. Capri is actually a gaming channel who I just did a collaboration with recently, and have two more that are going to be happening because I have a tiny gaming channel that I don't do anything with, but it's there. Also, hi,
Wonder Lady.
Hey, Faye.
How are you doing?
Hey.
I see that madness has not made you want to run away at this point.
No.
And the restored Liberty's torch.
Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, it's perfectly fine. I think we're probably only going to be on air for maybe another 20 minutes or so because I do have work in the morning. But you are here, which is cool because... Yeah. And I'm sorry that I haven't actually gotten around to doing the response to your questions for atheist videos yet.
You saw them?
I have seen them. I just haven't gotten a chance to respond to them because right now my pipeline of videos is enough to where it was a stretch and it was almost painful for how long I had to stay up to make my last video because technically
I saw it.
Yeah, the one on Catholicism or the Catholic one.
Oh, yeah, so
they're in the news at the moment.
Crazy.
That's the reason I did. I wouldn't have done the video if they weren't in the news right now because originally I was like, well, I'm just going to stand by and I'll sound off on this if I need to. But past that, I think it's pretty old hat that we know that they're dangerous. But then they're in the news again, bringing up dangers that have happened earlier, and it's sounding off enough. So it's like, okay, I need to put in my 2 cents.
Topical.
I don't know why people think this is such a modern problem, though. I mean,
it's not a modern problem. In fact, McCarrick, the one who, one of the main ones who's being hit in this case, he's being charged with a case from 50 years ago. This is not new.
Yeah.
And when
it's been a systemic whitewashing.
When syphilis was a thing, and the priests who were doing their bit acts in their church, I don't know what to call it because I'm not really a churchy, never did the churchy thingy, but when they were doing their bit acts in their churches, they were losing their noses because of syphilis, and it was kind of obvious who they were banging. I mean,
Michael Jackson.
Syphilis. I mean,
well, even go back to Shakespeare.
They were all banging Hitler because Hitler also had syphilis, right?
Syphilis closed the theaters several times during Shakespearean.
The "Get Thee to a Nunnery Go" is a reference to brothels, and so there's the association with Catholicism and illicit boinking and all of that. Even then,
exactly.
Yeah. The only thing that sucked about the videos, one, like somebody commented, two things happened. One, I messed up audio issues because I was rushing to get the video out because I'm like, this is not part of my normal schedule now. And two, somebody mentioned that my audio for the first minute sounded like I was rushed. And I'm like, yes, that's why I said it's an impromptu video. That's why it has like this much editing in it. It is an impromptu video, and it was responding to a half-hour-long newscast with Cardinal Burke. And I only took, like, I listened to the entire thing twice and then took the parts of it that I found egregious and responded to those. And I wasn't even supposed to be doing a video response yet. My next scheduled video is supposed to be Dangers of Woo, because I try to take video responses and do those sometimes, and then do my actual more pro-science, pro-arguments videos, where it's not me going after people, because I don't like doing video responses as much as those. It just so happens that responses garner more views, so I have to take the lesser of two evils sometimes.
You know, the craziest thing about this recent scandal is after every single major scandal that's happened in the last 20 or 30 years that's become public, there were scandals, there were one-off cases in the 80s and 90s. Then you had... in 1996, the church in Ireland decided that they were going to take a stance to try to limit it, and they were going to have a basically a zero tolerance policy, where like if you screw up one time, or no, they didn't have a zero tolerance. They had a policy where they were going to turn you over to the authorities. And then in 1997, the following year, they wrote a secret letter to the bishops in Ireland that basically said, this is problematic. We don't agree with this. Don't turn them over. Like, they discouraged them from actually handing them over to the authorities.
But that's disgusting, though.
2002 was the Boston Globe scandal. The following year, they said we're going to have a zero tolerance policy. But while they were implementing that to some degree in the United States, they were relocating the priests to places like South America, where they have a whole lot more power in the community, and there's a whole lot less recourse for the local citizens.
Yeah, the laws are much more lax there.
When the entire police department and the government and everyone, it's like 95% Catholic in some of these countries, there's absolutely no recourse. The cops don't even want to hear the cases. The Philippines, the same thing happened. There was a scandal there. Australia, there was a choir in Germany where the Pope's own brother knew about cases and let it happen for decades.
Yeah, and I know that I saw that you were, I think it was you and GC who were planning on getting some videos out about it as well. And I figured that my main thing was I could go into all the research over all the horrible things that are happening there, but you guys are much better at that than I am. My thing was, after listening to the newscast, the thing that got me was that, at least for Cardinal Burke, and granted he's one of the more conservative Catholics, he said that the issue in the Catholic Church, and anybody who understands a little bit about human psychology will know why this is so counterintuitive. He said that the issue in the Catholic Church is an issue of sexual immorality, which as a blanket statement is technically true. But then he clarifies that his issues are with priests having sex outside of marriage. So any priest having sex of any kind, essentially, because they're basically married to the Catholic Church once they accept themselves into the bishophood. And then he said also the issue is not a issue of pedophilia. The issue is an issue of homosexuality, which is incredibly disgusting because it conflates all people who are homosexual with people who are actively harming children. That's already a disgusting comparison. And the second part that bothers me during that a lot is you can make the statement that it's sexual immorality. True, it is a sexual act and it's immoral. Okay, you've got that far. But if you clarify that and then say, oh, this is an issue of having extramarital sex and that leads to this, no, I would argue that if you have a bunch of dudes, and the Pope has actually said that no less than 2% of Catholic bishops, so about 8,000 by his estimate, are pedophiles, you have at least 8,000 people who have some A, predatory tendencies, which is already bad, and B, you're giving them nothing but sexual repression and letting them feel nothing but sexual tension, which is going to do nothing but expound those predatory tendencies.
In Boston, they actually found that it was it was about 10% of priests in the diocese. And those are just the cases that they knew about. Those are the ones that where the records weren't destroyed, that they had actual files for. So the numbers are likely significantly higher. The problem is that you have people who they're not just celibate, but it's like if you have horrible urges and tendencies that like let's say that you feel guilt over being attracted to young children.
Just say you feel guilt for masturbation too.
So you're a pedophile, and rather than seeking out a healthy, spouse or spousal relationship with someone of, consenting age, and at least having some sexual release there, then they're turning to the church, trying to completely just live a celibate lifestyle because they feel guilty and
which
shameful.
We know doesn't work.
Oftentimes, because they're gay, they'll go into the ministry because they feel so much guilt and shame over their urges, which they're told are sinful, and so they don't have a loving relationship. They don't have a loving partner who's an adult, a consenting adult, and they're surrounding themselves with kids. And then when they offend and they do these horrible things, then the Catholic Church just assumes that, oh, it's just a one-off, it's just a sin. We'll punish them with a couple years of prayer and penance, and then put them in front of other kids, and it's insane.
Why do you think this happens so often with the Catholic Church, not with other Protestant denominations? At least not as much.
Well, they have enforced celibacy.
It is happening.
Yeah, it is happening in there too, but it's most prolific in the church because there's a distinction in the order in how these things happen. In most Protestant churches, you don't have specific time where a priest or a bishop is supposed to spend a particular amount of time with a singular individual. Yet with Catholicism, we do have that, where you have to say your sins, and you're doing this alone with a bishop. When you have a system like that, where there is alone time with the priest built into the system, there's a mechanism that can now be argued that's an enabler that doesn't exist in a lot of Protestant faiths. It is happening in them, but we don't hear about it as much because they don't have literally a systemic mechanism that allows for it by default.
Okay, Cyrus, I got to ask you because I agree with you. I want to ask Cyrus a question on that because I do agree with you, Cyrus. But the question is then, is that systemic methodology that they're using to enable these pedophiles something that is just something that is accidental because of the way they have the system, or is that something that is actually incorporated into the system to facilitate? I would say that it might begin as accidental, but I would say that there's definitely a purpose to keeping it. Once it's been you can have any system of any kind that can cause harm that was not intended to cause harm. This happens a lot. But what happens is once it has been demonstrated that the system causes harm, then allowing that system to proliferate, that is systemic, that is enabling, that's what I hold issue with. And that's what I've argued. That's what I've argued on Twitter, is it not?
Goes a step further.
Comment, though, the age of consent at the Vatican, and we all know that that is its own sovereign little country, is 12.
7.
12.
12.
7. Now, 7. One of the bishops actually said that a 7-year-old should have known that being raped was wrong.
Well, that doesn't mean that that's the legal.
What I'm saying,
she's talking about the legal age of consent.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Is 12.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Which is well below any age. Like I understand
that, like, the age of accountability. I'm sorry.
Yeah, not the age of accountability.
12.
Which and because the Vatican is a sovereign state by itself, then they are allowed to make those rules. And by the way, if anybody is a Ken Hammonism person who thinks that we need to have a theocracy, that is demonstrable evidence of why we don't need a theocracy.
Yeah. One factor here that may be playing a role is the long tradition of the fact that it's the Roman Catholic Church. The Romans as a culture had a system of, it doesn't matter what you do, it's what you appear to be doing that's important. So there was a systemic culture going back for centuries about public appearance and meeting the public obligations, but not necessarily what people were doing behind closed doors. And that filtered into that culture in a little bit of a different way than you find in Protestants. The fun, you can use the word, would be to compare whether or not Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox Church, which are also hierarchical systems where the priest is an intermediary and people don't read the Bible much on their own independently of that, would function dynamically similar to the Catholics or not.
And Tom, if you wanted to say something, hold on.
Just FYI, because I wanted to check this out. According to what I've just read, Vatican City in 2013 raised it from 12 to 18 from Pope Francis.
Oh boy, they're going liberal.
I mean, so here's the thing
wait, but it was due to scandals, and it took scandals.
Yeah, that there's where you start to have an issue, because you would think scandal means that you got caught. That's the thing. It's not that it wasn't happening; it's that it took them getting caught, and that requires some type of complacency to begin with. Thomas, there was something you wanted to say just a second ago.
Yeah, when you were making the comparison between Protestant churches and Catholic churches, a big difference is that there's no the Protestant churches are decentralized, so you don't generally have one hierarchical structure where you have a power system.
You can't move people
like the Pope. So if you have one Protestant church and you go to, the authorities or something, you're more likely to go to the cops rather than, just the church hierarchy.
Mm.
And there isn't just like one person or like one, there's not like a body of cardinals or, a power structure in place that allows it to continue.
I'd say the dubs are a bit different.
With the exception of Mormons and J-dubs.
Well, and JWs have a massive scandal right now too. They've been paying $4,000 a day just to keep documents from leaking out with the names of and identities
Can
there
we
and stories
say as a
of
general principle that self-policing and sexual repression are not good combinations?
No, the Catholic Church never self-police. Here's the thing: because they are their own country, they have their own bank, they have their own autonomy. Who watches them? I mean, who polices them? They don't have an internal mechanism for any of this. Matter of fact, we've given them chances and chances again to police their own system, right? Even for the first few times these scandals came around, right? Back in 2012, people were like, okay, let's see if they'll actually fix this shit. They clearly have not. And at this point, I stand by my tweet that I do believe very strongly. If you're a member of the Catholic Church and you go to that church and you donate to that church, you are, to me, complicit.
And I think that's very true, because it's not the same thing as taxing, which is a really disgusting comparison I hate people using, because taxes aren't, you don't have a choice in taxes. The only choice you have is to leave your country, and you might not have that choice because that requires a particular financial burden you might not have. Church, on the other hand, you have a choice in that. You can go to the church, but you don't have to tithe to the church. I even made it clear in my video, if you're a Catholic and you want to stay a Catholic, please do not leave your kids alone with priests.
Exactly. And
unless you're in Europe,
I had two people,
because there are cases where the church is actually financed in Germany, independent of whether your opinion. So the Protestants and Catholics and others actually get paid through the state in a way that doesn't happen over here.
I had two people on my Facebook that actually ran that argument, right? That, why you live in the United States. And here's my thing. I will not address two Quaker arguments. I will not address things that are clearly whataboutism. If I'm asking you about a specific thing and you try to turn it on me, two things are going to happen. One, I'll tell you that it's whataboutism. I'm not going to go down that route. And if you continue, I usually end up blocking that person. I'm just not interested in hearing excuses after fucking excuses after fucking excuses. And by turning it to something as unrelated, and I'm not going to spend 2 hours explaining why I live in the United States, because it's not even a fair comparison. But I will tell you, I left the LDS Church on moral grounds because of the way they treated gay people and the way they did conversion therapy and the way they supported the Evergreen Project and the way they supported Prop 18 or whether they supported or tried
California Prop whatever it was in there. California.
It was Prop 18 2008, but I don't remember if it was what the pro or con was. But basically, they were against gay marriage, and I couldn't deal with that. Right? I thought they overstepped themselves. I thought that them to be able to leave such a ridiculous thing that you can shock people and change their sexuality, or the people just pray away the gay. No, fuck no. It doesn't work like that. And so I took moral ground, and I've asked Catholics to do the same thing. And yet they're saying, "Oh, you're just being hypocritical because you live in the United States." That's not a fucking fair comparison. Don't bring that shit to me, because I will ignore you. I'll tell you it's not right. I'll tell you it's whataboutism. I'll probably end up ignoring you. If you continue it, I'll block you because I'm not playing that fucking game.
No, and what typically happens, what really bothers me is when you get people who I can understand somebody running an argument like that if they are in fact Catholic, because at that point they've got a horse in the race and they're trying to defend that horse. I can understand going from that angle. I think that it's a disgusting angle. I don't think you should take that angle.
But I won't go down that angle with them. So it's why bother? You're not going to get anywhere.
Well, what bothers me though is when you've got people who are either not religious nons or Protestants or any other type of denomination who don't have a horse in the race, but are still trying to defend the Catholic Church.
Yep.
That bothers me. And by the way, to address what's happening in the chat, if anybody thinks, because this is an issue that I've seen White Engine posit, and I'm sorry, anything that White Engine posits, I'm willing to go down the genetic fallacy route and say that it's just wrong.
Because you're a fucking idiot. Yeah.
But,
I agree.
But he pointed out that, atheists talk about what's going on in the Catholic Church like it's the only problem right now. I will use... I know that it's weird for an atheist to be using a quote from a Muslim imam, but Imam Tawhidi said it better than I can here. You do not walk into a cancer ward and say, what about AIDS?
Yep, exactly.
We are focused on a problem that is systemic. Nobody's saying it's the only problem, and nobody's saying that it's strictly with the Catholic Church. In fact, there's a reason why when it comes to religions that cause harm, which to me, a demonstrable high amount of them do, I consider myself an anti-theist.
And I should also note that people when I go to the Red Pill Religion, they've done some videos on this, right? There's that core 12 people group, and one of them obviously is the White Engine and stuff. But there's a couple of them, and then they'll say shit like, "Well, Steve, you're not even a believer, so you have no dog in this fire. You're just feigning outraged." Do I motherfucking sound like I'm feigning outrage when I put that shit on Twitter, when I put my shit on Facebook, when I'm on a video? I don't have to bother with feigning outrage. My outrage is quite fucking legit. I assure you.
Not to mention, you don't have to have a horse in the race, especially if you consider yourself a humanist in any capacity. You don't have to have a horse in the race to say don't. Yeah, you don't have to have a horse in the race to say don't hurt children. That seems.
Yeah, I don't get it. It's bizarre, dude.
And there's a huge difference between saying, okay, I don't have all the details. I'm not going to rush to judgment until I know the facts. And actually taking an active hand and covering something up. So, like, by contrast, when the atheist community had, there was the Lawrence Krauss case, there was the David Silverman case. Like, every single person that I talked to that I saw all over the internet was like, let's get the facts, like, get the information, learn. Like, they're sharing posts, they're sharing articles. They're not like shh, just like hush hush, rub, push this.
Yeah, they're not like he's a figurehead. Don't say anything. Most people, when you brought up Krauss during the case that was happening with Krauss, I typically saw two things. And exclusively saw two things. There was either one side that said, like you said, Thomas, let's get all the facts before we jump to assertions. And the other side would say, whether or not what he says is disgusting says nothing about the arguments that he's presented in the case of atheism.
But the point being is that the atheist didn't try to sweep it under the rug that he was some kind of person that you couldn't touch. And by the way, I was like that too. Get the information. But I got to tell you, when I listened to Christina Rad's video, she's very convincing.
Yeah,
very convincing.
But by contrast, in 2008 in Australia, after the scandal was breaking there, the Catholic Church, it offered a statement where basically the Pope said that he shared in the suffering of those responsible, as if he knows the first slightest thing about the suffering that they went through. He's like, oh, that all the perpetrators should be brought to justice, while simultaneously maintaining a list of 4,756 claims of abuse in Australia alone that the church refused to turn over to authorities. Now, if they were to release the names of everyone, the Catholic Church would go bankrupt because they've been covering it up for years. There'd be lawsuits. They're already paying millions of dollars. So
billions of dollars. Almost $4 billion.
So when the Pope says, at the same time, he's urging his flock to, and I quote, support and assist your bishops in combating this evil. It's like, nice. So we're supposed to support the people who are raping our kids. That's just lovely.
Well, like somebody had tweeted something along the lines of, well, think of all the souls that we lost. Listen, we have to pray for the people to stay with the church. And I said, why would God listen to your prayers about people staying in the church when he didn't listen to the prayers of the children being molested? What the fuck is up with you? It boggles my fucking mind.
These people care more about maintaining their empire than they do about actually helping people that have been.
Oh, hell yeah.
harmed.
Well, it's like Cardinal Burke in the video that I just did a response to. He said that the best thing that people can do to combat this issue, and I will quote as best I can, and my video is there for people to find his quote, and I have a link to his video for people to find his quote. So if I take anything out of context, rip me a new one. But. Oh, baby. Steve, you rip me a new one all the time. I have to use lots of
told you, I am like the gayest straight man of all time.
But when it comes to when he was asked, hey, what should we do about the situation in a spiritual context, he said, pray that things get better and fast. Like, okay, so hold on. First of all, you're telling me that the best thing we can do when it comes to pedophilia in a church is to not eat fucking food. That's where we are.
Hopes and prayers, baby.
Now, can you imagine if this were to happen in any other situation? Imagine if there was a big scandal with Walmart. It turned out Walmart employees for a long time had been molesting children coming into the store. Just imagine the amount of outrage. It would completely destroy the entire corporation.
Or if it was a Toys R Us.
Hang on. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. But whenever it's a religious institution, they can get away with it.
Nate, I have made that exact motherfucking same argument. The same thing you just said. I said, look, if this was any kind of privately owned business, right? You know that business is going to be held responsible. I don't know if you've been in retail before, but many of us have. We understand how HR works. The business gets fucked. Even if one person, look what happened with Starbucks when one person said, hey, to a couple black people, you can't use the bathroom. It was an international incident that required a whole modification of how they do their policy, right? If this would have happened in retail, that business would be held responsible. So somebody needs to answer me. Why the fuck is not the church responsible? How is there not a responsibility for them to come out and say, look, you know what? We need to reorganize our entire system. And I don't care if they stop believing what they believe. The way they have their system now, as I pointed out with Sirius, it is not an accidental fact anymore that they, or accidental that this has produced these types of situations, right? I mean, because I believe Sirius is correct. The way they have it set up, it did foster this kind of thing, right? And it was maybe at the beginning some kind of accidental.
It doesn't have to start off purposeful. It just has to end up purposeful.
Because somebody asked me that question.
Because we're not because the thing is that
purpose or not.
The thing is that we're not talking about, was this something that was meant to be biblical canon when the Catholic Church was founded?
Right.
No, we're talking about an issue that's happening to real people right now who are alive right now. And in this situation right now, if they can change biblical canon laws, they can change anything. I'm sorry. Every single rule in the Catholic Church is arbitrary and up to change and interpretation. That's why they have cardinal lawyers.
Yeah, and so when first somebody asked me, did the church start off this way? Was this the intent of the church? And I'm like, well, I doubt it.
It doesn't matter how it started. It matters how it is in the present day.
And that's exactly what I said. I seriously doubt that a bunch of Catholics got together and said, hey, we're going to form a religion like this, and we're going to do it so we can get away with molesting kids, right? I don't.
We're going to make a religion about diddling children.
Yeah.
The Romans were the model, where you had the emperor at the top, you had procurators down below, you had an authority figure, masculine structure that the Roman system operated under, and the Roman Catholic Church adopted the same internal structure that they did, and the same rationalization practices, and it was going on for centuries and centuries and centuries. This is why you had a Protestant Reformation, because of all of the corruption and sweeping under the door. We don't know how much pedophilia was going on because the things that sort of got their attention were actual knocked up nuns and things that were going on that were the reason why a lot of Protestants were screaming bloody murder. And then you end up with wars and religious wars and disembowelments and defenestrations. And it's a nuisance when religions can make these decisions and when the state can enforce them. So clearly the core problem with the Catholics is that they're trying to self-police, and that cannot in principle work.
Yeah, you have an outside agency to do those kind of things. By the way, if you guys tweet about this, if you guys tweet anything about the church or anything like that, hashtag churches to blame.
Do you think it would be possible within our timeline for the churches to be taxed, or do you think it's not going to happen?
I think there's a problem with that.
I don't think they should be taxed, because as soon as you start taxing the churches, they then have the ability to sway political decisions at a much greater scale than they can right now. Right now,
wait, you're joking, right?
No, he's seriously.
The reason that there are impediments. I say you're joking, right, is because.
Well, hang on, RJ. Hang on.
The reason I say you're joking, right, is because they already do. There are so many, there are massive churches in the States that nominate candidates from the pulpit, donate to candidates, and they will send letters to the IRS and say, "Go ahead, I dare you take away my tax."
You didn't hear what he said. He said more than they are now. We acknowledge that does happen, but they would be without constraint. They would be out without. They don't need the Johnson Amendment.
I don't want them to have more power than they already do.
They would literally be able to put a theocracy.
Now, one of the things that I hope from a methods direction is that one of the big problems that has occurred, it's not that you can eliminate all wackaloons being nominated for things, but the reporters and the people haven't put people nearly to the level of feet to the fire on these sorts of things. So often people are elected to local positions and nobody knows they're a creationist until they start doing stuff on textbooks, that the areas that they have their niches know these things, but they use buzzwords and the like. Now there's some areas like that nitwit over in Wyoming, the demographics are such that he was elected anyway, even though everyone knew what there was, because most of his population agrees with him. But reporters and grassroots activists need to kind of ask people these methods questions of how do they arrive at their positions, what positions do they have. We only find out, for example, that somebody is a young earth creationist usually accidentally because it pops up in some peripheral context. Why don't we know about that for everybody before they even get nominated?
Yeah, I think there's other ways to address the issue, though. I mean, granted, you know, a lot of churches are big businesses. There's no question about that. And I think that if there's things where they're doing things illegal, like, for example, I think the Benny Hinn, I think that whole ministry is illegal. I think that people have tax evasion in their own personal taxes. I think they have, you know, things that they're questionable, that if they committed crimes with monies of the church. When those things happen, then yes, then those churches should lose their church exempt status and they should no longer be recognized as churches any longer. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, my issue is that we, especially because I live in the South, right now the church has a lot of political influence where I am. It's always had it. I grew up as a young earth creationist because of a private school, but they couldn't teach young earth creationism in a public school because they are not taxed, because they are considered completely separate from the state. The minute you allow them to be taxed, from what I understand, you then start having a blurring of the line of separation between church and state.
That's why we have that tax-free exemption, because of church. Exactly, that separation of church and state. You know, I know it sounds great. You know, let's go tax the churches, and maybe somebody should do more in-depth research on that. So, I mean, that's something that totally Kool-Aid might want to tackle. But I don't think it's just to throw that out there. We should tax the churches on face value. It's sensical to me.
Is there any way that we could tax the churches while still maintaining that separation so they can't get too political?
Possibly, but we also have the Johnson Amendment, right? And so the amendment is such that a church cannot put forth a pundit as a representation of their beliefs, right? So I can't say if I'm a pastor of a church, we are supporting this person for office, we're putting them up, we're putting money behind them. They can't do that. Now there are loopholes to that. Okay,
they already are though.
There's loopholes, and the system sucks.
Everybody finds ways of maneuvering around. It's the wink, wink, nudge, nudge phenomenon. For all practical purposes, the Federalist Society is acting as a filter for all court nominees in the Trump administration. It's just de facto. Nobody put them into that position, but the main way around it is at the ballot box and an aroused population. None of these things can happen if people don't elect such people and are aware of it and make it a point of issue. And too much of it goes on below the radar until it's too late.
I think the way to go about it, and Fred points out, look, there are 501c3s that are nonprofit organizations that could be affected if we start messing with that kind of stuff. The better way to go about it is these churches that are actually committing fraud. Look, if you're head of a church and you're living in a mansion and you have a $4 million house, a $100,000 car, I guarantee you those people are not paying the taxes they should, and that's considered to be personal tax. Okay, that is taxable. Okay, and most of it's probably taking funds from the church. I think a lot of misappropriation of fundage takes place in these bigger churches. I think there's money laundering that probably goes on in a lot of these churches. That's what they need to go after. They need to stop being afraid to go after the church. But you know why they don't go after the churches? Because the churches have money to have legal representation, and it takes forever to get anywhere. It's a huge fiasco. They're scared of the churches.
Not to mention
political suicide.
It is political suicide. Exactly.
Not to mention,
in the Trump administration, it's accented. Because you've got an administration that actively now is promoting, we want our religions to have more special treatment, and that it's persecution to have anybody do otherwise. So that
and I don't want to give them any more power in that argument than they already have. And one of the bigger issues that we'd have right now. So, for instance, what is the largest church in the world as far as Christianity is concerned? It's the Catholic Church.
Catholicism.
Okay, so Catholicism, we all agree, is a huge problem. So, if you tax churches, the only churches that will be harmed are going to be the smaller ones.
Yes.
It's not that I don't want them to be harmed in some form or fashion, because to me, peddling lies to children, telling them they're going to burn in hell is not a way that I would personally make a living, and I couldn't ethically, and that's pretty much what all the churches here in the South are. But when you start taxing the churches, the small churches are not going to be able to pay their taxes and they'll fall under. That's fine. You've effectively accomplished part of your goal, which is commendable because I don't think that they need to exist to begin with. But then the side effect of that is that the larger churches that already have the money to deal with this aren't going to have any problems whatsoever. They can literally just at that point hire lawyers and minimize their tax burden. If you've ever read any self-help books about how to create your own business, one of the things they mention, there's almost always a section in how to minimize your tax burden. They're not going to be taxed in the way that they need to be taxed to actually be defunded. They're going to find ways around it because then they're just going to operate like a regular business would in any other situation. Their tax burden is going to be almost minimized.
It'd be the Roman Catholic LLC.
Couldn't you have a different tax rate?
Also,
Yeah, just have a graduated income tax so that, and try to work on eliminating loopholes. I know that the bigger they are, the bigger their legal team. They're going to find ways around it.
Dude, you're talking to somebody who advocates for a flat tax, right? And I do think that the way the system is set up for the IRS and these different levels, it's just abysmal because
it is.
You're always going to find these loopholes. But you go after the personal tax. You go after the people that are making the money off of these small business or small churches, because the small churches, as you said, are going to be taxed out of existence because these are gifts and gratuities. A donation is a gift. You don't get taxed on a gift unless it's a certain amount, and even then the gifter is what pays it, and it's about $14,000 per person. So even if you're a married company, you want to give a donation, you can give up to $28,000 annually, and that's something that the person doesn't even have to report. Okay. So the people that all this money that they're getting is considered to be gifted to them.
Yeah, it's already going to be protected under current tax code.
Yeah, so you got it. Just by saying tax of the church, I think that's going to open up a whole freaking mess of legalities and tax problems.
And the thing that bothers me about that is because I agree with the sentiment. Like
Oh sure.
And Thomas, you know that I'm somebody who I respect you a lot, and I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. I would love for churches to be taxed to the point where it's hard for them to actually work, because there are people like Joel Osteen who absolutely disgust me as human beings, and I would love for them to be taxed into the ground and then actually start to have to benefit society in some way, shape, or form, even if that benefit is paying into the government that actually is allowing them to have a business on their land. I would love that. In theory, that's something that I can support 100%. But unfortunately, there are a lot of ramifications to a decision like that would do nothing but benefit those larger churches. And for the most part, with very few exceptions, those larger churches are the problem. We do have some smaller churches where you've got like your Andersons and your Powells that have their 200 and 300 person denominations that they're teaching how to be hateful people, and they're a problem. In fact, I wish I could solve the Anderson problem. I specifically called him out and asked him to have a debate with me because I think that he's a disgusting human being and he needs to be called out on his shit. But unfortunately, as much as I would love for those churches to go under, which they would, we would still have the Olsteins, we would still have the Catholic Church, we would still have the JWs, we'd still have the Mormon Church, we'd still have all
Scientology.
Scientology wouldn't even be touched. Their legal team is strong.
Do you know? I found out, and that if everybody stopped giving to the Scientology Church, they still would have enough money to last another century.
Yeah, they got a huge thing. An interesting data point, I'll throw this out for what it's worth, is that currently on the Supreme Court there are no Protestants, and the majority of them are Roman Catholics.
Well, we have a whole. I think right now we have a whole problem with the evangelicals in politics to begin with. I mean,
Mike Pence is a big example of this.
When you have a vice president who doesn't even know the goddamn the earth, what the fuck does that say to the rest of the civilized world? Honestly. Now,
not to mention, he had that entire levy in Texas where he was trying to get creationism taught.
Yeah, we've had most of the political people have had some belief in God. They've always had spiritual advisors. I don't give a crap about any of that. That's not my game thing. That's Thomas's realm. Thomas is the anti-theist kind of person. But there are certain things we obviously agree on. And for fuck's sake, if you are the second most powerful person in the world, even though the vice president isn't really, but and you have these positions that are so just completely opposite of what we actually know. For example, what would you think if the vice president was a flat earther? Most people at that point would go, "Oh, no, we can't have that." Well, how is
when there's almost no difference between being a flirter and being a yek?
So that's my point.
It requires the same amount of reality and science denial.
Exactly.
That's why impeaching Trump scares me, because you get President
Pence.
Then
you'd get Pence.
Wait, are you guys serious though? Because
yes,
Trump is already pushing the religious agenda. He's already pushing.
Oh yeah, but Pence would put it into high gear.
He's already
Pence is an
pushing it.
ideologue.
Well, he's not
isn't.
talking about the.
But the difference.
Hear me out though.
Okay, hear you out.
Because Trump, he's not just pushing the crazy fundamentalist agenda. He's also doing things like he's pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. I don't know that that's something that Pence would have necessarily done.
He's
also doing things like
he's buddying up. That's part of the dogma.
He's buddying up with people like Kim Jong-un and Putin. I don't think that Pence would be Putin's bitch. Like that's something that genuinely concerns me.
Okay, fair. Wait. Hang on one second.
Hold on, RJ. Hold on.
Even though that's true, Thomas, here's the difference. I don't think fucking Trump believes one word of this evangelistic crap. I don't think he really gives a shit.
He doesn't have to. Right. He doesn't have to. He's still taking the action.
Let me finish. Mike Pence is a true blue believer, and I think the true blue believer is dangerous.
Does it make a difference if you believe it or not, but you still end up at the same point? Like if
I think he'd be worse.
No, it doesn't. That's why it would change.
If Pence and Trump both if both of them wind up revoking Roe versus Wade and putting like the most radical extremist justices in the Supreme Court, you're going to end up with the same result anyways. But
I think it would be worse. I think we'd have worse policy.
I think if we get rid of Trump, like that's the first thing, the first step is get rid of Trump. And then we'll deal with. I
agree that the first step would be getting rid of.
I agree with that. I'm not against that idea, right?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't think anybody here likes Trump in any capacity.
Yeah, no, I would.
Pence is awful. Pence is bad. I'm not saying he's not. I just don't think that.
I would be willing to spin the wheels and see what happens.
I think you
have to remember that demographic. How did Trump become president? Is the creationist NRA president. That demographic did him. And they are committed to him. Evangelicals who would be excoriating the sinfulness of Bill Clinton are now giving Donald Trump a completely free ride. Well, if you look at that Tony Perkins, Jay Sekulow worldview, Jay Sekulow is Trump's lawyer now, that hyper-conservative is what put him into power, what wants to keep him in power, and Pence is their guy. He was the one that Manafort talked to put on the campaign.
Yeah, he was.
The climate science aspect has been a long-standing buzzword in the creationist community. That anybody that you would find from that framework would have had exactly the same opinions. Trump happens to hold some of these things as kind of tropes and run amok. But the fact that the two critical features here are Mike Pence and Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions is another person that reflects that kind of old boy network, old style racism, go after the drug things from the 1970s. It's an old 1970s worldview. None of that would change under Pence. Pence has a tradition when he was governor of Indiana of being quiet and calm and manipulative and stonewalling and dangerous. And that would proceed in even more state if he were president of the United States. So it would be less exciting, he tweets. But that culture camp agenda that put Trump in office would not go away under Pence.
Explain to me, though, one single action that Trump has taken, or that Pence would take, that Trump has not already taken. Like, he's already doing it. He's operating by their playbook, but in addition to that, he's destroying our trade networks, destroying NAFTA, alienating us from our allies in the European Union. Everything. Hear me out. Stop. Okay.
Pence,
every single thing that Trump is doing is it's destroying our future. You look at the tariffs that he's putting in that are in place that are leading to trade wars. I don't think that that's necessarily an action that Pence would take. It's like
Pence might actually pull back from trade war.
It's like he's on Putin's leash, and so he's taking actions that are destroying the West, and Putin's getting the last laugh. I don't think that would be the case under Pence.
So I think you might have a point there. What I think my stance on this might be is that I think Pence might be more dangerous than Trump, but I think he's so marginally more dangerous than Trump that we might not necessarily see much of a difference. We would just see pains happening in different areas. I do agree that I don't.
There's one caveat though, and that is the fact that Pence isn't as popular as Trump, and if
That's actually a good
was
point.
removed, it would actually stain Pence, and people would have less tolerance. Because there's a good amount of Trump supporters who think, oh, the rich guy is going to make us richer, not realizing that no, he's not, and it would kind of snowball and make things a little bit more difficult for Pence. He doesn't have the pull, he doesn't have the popularity, he doesn't have a lot of things. He definitely doesn't have the charisma. I don't think he could pull it off. So
Hypothetically,
I can hear you doing that.
If
even
we
though
were
he's
to,
dangerous, I think if we get rid of Trump, regardless of if Pence steps up, he'll have a harder time pulling things off without his little puppet.
I think that might be a fair point, because right now one of the reasons that Trump is able to do the things that he does in the capacity he does it is because, for all intents and purposes, a lot of people in America, for better or worse, see themselves in Trump in some form or fashion. He's the businessman who did it on his own, even though he got a loan from his dad. We'll just ignore that part. But he's the businessman who did it on his own. He's the TV celebrity. He was known well before he stepped into the political office. Pence doesn't have that going for him. And I can see the point that Pence would have a lot less power the minute that he had a stain on his reputation, because Trump right now has 1,000 stains on his reputation and nothing is stopping him. Whereas Pence, it might be a little different, but you can go on, Nathan. Sorry.
I was going to say, in the 2020 election, who do you think could have a better chance of winning, Trump or Pence, up against a Democrat?
I think Trump has the support right now. Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing that you people, so much hate for Trump, which is understandable. I can't stand him either. But the reality is, Trump has an evangelical base that will not fucking waver no matter what the guy fucking does. He has a very strong, and I don't think Pence has that same base that Trump has.
So you think that Pence is easier to beat?
If you look at Tony Perkins and the like, they just adore Pence. He's bland, but he's their kind of bland.
Sure.
The whole GOP vote base, Sanders. Trump didn't get more votes than he did. Even states. What was the reason why things fell apart is that there was lower voter turnout on Democrat side. So the Republican base, the creationist community, that bloc is going to vote for anything with the R on the name that passes muster. And if Pence or anybody else were on the ticket, they will be doing that as well, just as they're going to be supporting Trump for re-election. And Trump, of course, is a hyper-egotist, and he's going to run amok on it. But Pence would be probably more likely to pull back on some of the trade policy. Kudlow might have a little bit more influence with him on there. The problem with there are problems in the Republican Party. The reason why the Republicans don't know how to govern is because you've got the branch in the House, the Freedom Caucus, that are hyper conservatives that will just blow the government up if they can't get what they want. And then there are the moderate branch of the Republican Party, which would have been still quite conservative by 1960 standards. I remember liberal Republicans back in the 1960s. They don't exist now. And that hasn't gone away. Trump doesn't know how to deal with it. I don't think Pence would be able to know how to deal with it. So you would get a different mix of wacky, but that culture camp conservative agenda that the evangelical community wants would not be slowed down one moment. The judges and all the rest would be the same kind that would be put through by Trump.
I agree, and I agree. But did you talk about his hyper narcissism? Did you listen to Ainsley Earhart's interview with him, where she had asked him how he was doing, what grade he would get? What grade do you think Trump would give for his performance?
Oh God, yes, A+.
Yeah. A+ for failing.
No president in the history of the United States would have given themselves an A+. I guarantee it. Before them, they have their modesty. Yeah. Plus, they realize that they make mistakes, and he does not realize that he makes mistakes. He is a true textbook narcissist. Even Holy Kool-Aid say he's an A+. Holy Kool-Aid, you love your channel and you do a great job. But if I asked you to evaluate how you do on YouTube, would you even give yourself an A+?
Hell, Social Blade doesn't even give me an A+.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's bizarre.
Trump literally divides the world into two blocks of people. There are the people who recognize how brilliant he is. Those are brilliant people. They are winners. They are the elite. They are wonderful because they recognize how brilliant he is. If you disagree with him, if you do not consider Trump brilliant, then you are instantly a loser. You're a failure. Everything about you is a failure. If you're in a Broadway play, it's an overrated play. If you're an Oscar-winning actress, you're an overrated actress. And that's literally how he runs. It's also physically impossible for that guy on any subject whatsoever to avoid making it all about him in 5 minutes flat.
Oh, yeah.
That's because he's a New Yorker.
Well, not beyond. Well, that too. There's part of it is the New York mentality, but he's jacked up way beyond that. I mean, every great leader has a degree of I can do this better than you can. But he's not an Abraham Lincoln, and he's not a Franklin Roosevelt, and he's not even a Ronald Reagan. He's a man who has an incredible inflated ego about how much he knows. And one of the sobering things that I heard was from I can't remember his last name now. He's a security analyst, and you see him as a pundit quite a bit because he's an ex-CIA guy and all that. And he described Trump as the most profoundly ignorant man he's ever encountered. And that is a horrifying thing to have as a president of the United States, in addition to the narcissism.
Go ahead, Wonder.
I was going to say, there's one thing that the young people who were in high school are no longer in high school. There's more of them coming in. And a lot of them are atheists. They're not evangelicals. They're not fond of Trump. They were Bernie supporters. Like the high school kids who are, going to get their voting card, they're not going to support Pence. They're definitely not going to support Trump. And it's going to be a whole new election, not just in the year thing.
I think
that's another thing we can count on for the up and coming election.
I'm not totally sure about that. I've heard that young people are more right wing now than in previous generations.
Yeah, according
to the polling I've seen hasn't shown that. It depends on the demographics and others. Demographically, there's a general tendency towards a more free thinker mentality and a lack of interest in organized religion and traditional ways of doing things. They're not necessarily atheists. You have a core demographic, and that's one of the reasons why I found that creation evolution issue to be so ridiculously useful. That culture camp, culture war, conservative, creationist worldview. When you look at the people that believe that, and you look at the people who have ended up supporting Donald Trump, it's the same group. That it's very difficult to find somebody who is a Trump supporter that doesn't fall into that framework. And it's a big block of people. It's 40% of the United States. It's basically the vote, and they'll turn out again for it. But most evangelicals are not conservative. Most Americans voted against Donald Trump, but we still have that big blob out there. There were like 130 million people that voted in 2016. That left about 110 million who didn't vote. And we're not entirely sure where they're going to fall down on the mix. If we can get more of them people in, we can find out what it is. And
but he's right, though. There is a massive resurgence in conservatism among youth. And if you've had your pulse on the movement, you've been kind of paying attention to it, it's become like the hot new thing. And it's since the Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. It's since people like Jordan Peterson and others have
the pendulum swinging the other way, though,
as well as Shapiro. Like I wouldn't necessarily say that the pendulum has swung, but there is a resurgence. There is a massive resurgence, and I don't think that we should underestimate it.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying underestimate it, but I am saying that I don't think that the youth are as conservative as you think.
And they might not be, but right now it does look like we're going in that direction a little bit. I'm actually reading.
It's just the conservatives are actually getting vocal and getting louder. I mean, look at the marches, the Nazi things, and you have the kids who are like no NRA. You have kids saying, "Hi, I'm gender fluid. Hi, I'm not doing." There's more of them. They're just quieter.
But there's a huge pushback, though, because that entire segment of the population is being painted as extremist, radical, feminist, crazy, SJW.
The media, but that doesn't mean they're bending to the peer pressure of labels.
But people are eating it up. They may not be Republican, but they identify as conservative in growing numbers.
I don't know about that.
Well, then you
skeptical,
haven't
I'm
had your pulse
sorry.
on the movement as much, because almost every single, like where do young people hang out? They hang out on YouTube. They hang out in forums. They hang out in message boards, online, places like Reddit, 4chan. They'll go to Discord servers. They'll be on, like, you go to all these different places, Twitch,
And I
and
do have to agree that the people that I generally see, I know this is a bit anecdotal, but the people that I generally see on a lot of those platforms are incredibly anti-progressivism in most of the case. There's almost like a meme where you see somebody who says, "Hey, I'm gender fluid," and they get knocked down. Whether or not what the argument doesn't even come into like what the science is behind it. Nobody cares about any objective truth in it. It's just almost a meme to hate the progressive person online right now, and it's happening a lot, and it's really bothersome.
And it wasn't the case in 2008. It wasn't the case in 2012. I didn't see any of that. Like, I saw some, like I had some conservative friends and stuff in college, but it wasn't as strong as it is now. It was people fighting for gay rights. It was people fighting for feminism. It was a strong atheist push. And now it's pushing back. And it's all I see.
And I can understand that being something that's worrisome. I think at the end of the day, we have a decent. I know not been saying a lot, but this is more of a American politics discussion, so he doesn't really count.
I suppose nobody would know that I know a fuck ton about American politics, but I'm happy listening.
Here's a paper from Reuters that came out a couple months ago claiming that Democrats lose ground with millennials, and this was a poll done by Reuters. I wasn't sure if I think there might be any truth to that.
If you want to,
Yeah, organized
Only
political
because
parties,
of
that
what
might
they-
well be.
Okay. Sorry, go on.
I think ultimately what I think we can glean from this though is that we have a lot of people here. I've noticed something. A lot of us disagree with one another. Like there've been a lot of disagreements we've had.
You're always wrong.
I mean, this, so it's incoherent to think you could be right on something. But we have a diverse amount of political opinion on the panel that's here right now speaking. But I don't think any of us have gotten legitimately upset or angry at anybody in the panel.
Of course not.
You just there's a certain level of incredulity when something that sounds like it doesn't jive with the research that we've done, because everybody's done a different level of research here. I see that Nathan keeps on posting links to articles, which is wonderful because it's stuff that I'm reading as we're having the conversation. So
I always try to have a citation with what I say,
And that's good. I think most of us have a good habit of throwing that stuff in our videos too.
So where's the Trump supporters then? Because I mean, we kind of have a wide swatch of people in here. I think the only thing that everybody here that we agree upon is our skepticism and not having a God belief. But other than that, we are quite different people, and I think we all kind of agree that just Trump's a piece of shit.
Here's the thing: there's a reason there are no supporters in the panel, and I think everybody can agree it's because nobody on this panel is an idiot.
Fair point.
Well, no one ever lost a dime underestimating the intelligence of the American public, as H.L. Mencken said in the 1920s. And that's the thing that worries me. I'm the old fart historian here. And the current environment, not here as well, but also in the rest of the world, is really worrying me because it reminds me of the 1920s. When you had an increasing amount of authoritarian regimes occurring in Europe, you had Mussolini becoming head of Italy in the 1920s, you had increasingly wacky economic policies and worries about closing off immigration in the United States and worries about trade policies, and then you had the extremism of the Soviet Union arising. And from somebody 29, when income distribution was at the same disparate level that we have now, in another 10 years, the world is at war and millions of people are dying and everything is falling apart. So on a happy note, we have the prospects that we are in a pivotal moment. And what we do now may very well be setting the stage for what is going to be happening for the next 15 or 20 years. And I don't want to see a replay of the 1930s and the 1940s.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. There's a lot of things that happened, especially economically during that time, that we were not we did not do well during that at all.
Well, with that being said, are there any Democratic candidates that you will be voting for? Any ones that you think look promising right now?
Oh my, I'm trying to push Patty Murray to run for president, my senator. She works across the aisle with Ryan. She's intelligent. She doesn't have some of the baggage that Elizabeth Warren does. And she's very personable and effective. So I keep on saying, Patty Murray 2020, Patty Murray 2020. I haven't heard anything from her.
Anybody know if Matt Dillahunty's running?
I would vote for him if he were running.
He was running. I would be excited.
Well, we couldn't even. Aaron couldn't even get elected to state senate in Texas because it's just so costly.
Well, let's also remember that it's not just that. Aaron has a big making more suited for politics, especially not in a conservative state.
No, he looks like Satan.
Yeah, I love Aaron. The first time I got to talk to Aaron on Holy Kool-Aid channel was literally like I considered that a magical moment for me, even though I wasn't able to be there in audio as much as I wanted to. And then when I got to have Aaron come on my channel, I was like, this is amazing. I don't have heroes, but I do look up to you, and I'm so happy you're here.
You got to admit, that a couple years ago, even Thomas was a couple years ago. None of you guys would have thought your name would even have been mentioned with Aaron. Now all the time, it's like, oh, did you watch Aaron talk to Thomas? Oh, Aaron's in Skeptic, and oh yeah, non sequitur. I mean, it's like it's so nice to be in that community where the people that you have watched for a long time, and we disagree on a few things clearly, but I respect him immensely, and I love what he does, and I 100% behind him. So to be in that group where you can have access to such great minds, because I think he's brilliant, except when it comes to philosophy, of course. But on his biology stuff, I mean, he's just done so much to advance science and the position of creationism. I mean, his foundational falsehood of creationism is probably one of the best series of all time.
And it's not just a great YouTube series; it's also a great book. And just so I'm not speaking out my ass in there, I literally after seeing his YouTube series on it, one of the first things I did was go into Audible and I bought his book. And wonderfully enough, he is the narrator of his own book on Audible, so I got to listen to it twice and in more detail.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm sorry if I'm kind of all over the place. I'm really quiet right now because I can't read very loud because of roommates. So yeah, but I'm wrapping it up. I got to go.
I've got to get some sleep.
So anyways, this has been fun, guys. Tomorrow, if you guys are interested, I will be on Craig Reed's channel. That's the guy that Holy Kool-Aid had a discussion with on Non Sequitur Show a while back, if you remember, on objective morality. He wants me to come on to talk about spiritual experiences and kind of tell my story about leaving the church and things of that nature, and I told him I would. So that'll be at noon Pacific tomorrow if you guys are interested, because I don't really talk about that kind of stuff too much, but he wanted me to, and I said fine.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm fine with that because I've never had an experience with Craig that I walked away from with regret. Even though
he's a nice guy.
We disagree on a lot. Like we disagree on a whole lot of things.
Oh yeah, but I got to tell you, I'd much rather have a theist like that than somebody like Greg Lujek.
He's definitely a nice guy. I felt a little bad after my debate because I came out. I didn't leave. I came out with the gloves off, swinging
with Craig. Now, my first experience with Craig was on S.J. Thomason's channel of all places. Well, actually, no. My first experience with Craig was on Non Sequitur Show, and then personally on S.J. Thomason's channel. I like the guy.
Yeah.
To be fair, the last two times that I had debated creationists on other people's YouTube channels, one time it was like I was on Mouthy Buddha, and he pitted me against three creationists at the same time, and it was hard to get a word in. And I came in just kind of prepared to have like a civil dialogue with one person. I hadn't really got my stuff together, and I was just kind of being friendly. And I did a horrible job. And then I had another debate with Gret Glyer or something.
Yeah, Gret Glyer. Yeah,
where we were talking basically with two different definitions of objective morality.
Okay, absolutely, you're right. Okay, I was mixed up. The objective morality you had with Greg Geiler, that's right. With the debate you had with Craig Reed, what was that on? That was objective morality.
I think it was something like religion is a force for good or something like that.
Yeah, that's what it was. Is religion needed or a force for good or something?
Yeah. So when I got to my third debate, I was already like I had the scars from the last two, and I was like, I'm not pussyfooting around this one. And so
it's like practice.
I give you props at your debate. I didn't like debating. I did my two. I can safely say that I annihilated my opponents, and I'm done with that. I like the moderated type approach. I like the discussion. So people that still debate, all power to you. I love it, listening to
You
it.
had a debate today, didn't you, with the global warming thing?
No. Those aren't debates. Those are discussions. I've had 2 formal debates. I debated Wayne Fillmore because he challenged me years ago on Macroevolution. By the time he got done, 2 hours later, he came back and said, Steve, I looked at what you told me to look at, and I think you're right. A month later, he left Young Earth Creation of them.
Wow.
I would call that a win. I would call that a win.
Wait, so Steve, that's your awesome experience, and yet you threw in the towel with debate?
Oh no! And the second one was even better. The second one, the person didn't change their position, but that was with Ronnie.
Oh, Ronnie?
And if you guys haven't, a lot of people don't know that I formally debated Ronnie after him bugging me forever and ever and ever, because he finally found a topic that I felt comfortable enough where I could just wreck him. Because what he was doing, he was trying to relate ATP synthase to turbines. And people may know I worked on turbines in the military, right? That's part of the nuclear training. You have to learn about turbines and steam theory. And I was trying to explain to him initially that a turbine, by definition, changes fluid energy into mechanical energy, specifically rotational energy. And a ATP synthase works on what's called a proton pump or a proton differential across the membrane. 2 very different forms of mechanism by which something rotates. Anyways, I accepted his challenge, and I had 2 presentations prepared. And I thought I made them simple. I was told later they were still a little more complicated than they need to be. I am not bragging. I did not think they were that complicated. I, honest to God, thought I broke it down as simply as you could to talk about Rateau stages and Curtis stages, pressure velocity compounding, and how a turbine physically works to extract the most amount of energy out of the steam. Because you don't want, obviously, your condenser at steam pressure is going to blow up, right? So you got to extract the steam little by little. You don't want to get impingement. So I kind of did these.
You're already over my head.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's the one thing that I actually learned about it, because I graduated nuke school, so you have to be indoctrinated. Yeah. But I knew that I could tear him apart on it. Well, anyways, we got to the point where we were going to do questions and answers, and his words will stick into my head forever. He's like, I don't want to continue.
Wow.
He was
I give up.
So demolished that he was like, I don't want to continue with this. And then about a year later, he's like, well, I really didn't put much effort in that debate with Steve. I was too busy playing my guitar and tuning it while I was doing it and blah, blah, blah. And everybody's like, Ronnie, shut the fuck up. He destroyed you.
At that point, you lose credibility. But I will say that everybody here is probably incredibly sleepy. So
yes.
I know that, Steve, you gave what you're going to be doing here next.
Yep.
Final. Thomas, Holy Kool-Aid, do you have anything that you'd like to say before you hop out?
Oh, I'm just working on tearing down the Catholic Church for raping kids in my next video, so stay tuned for that.
You got my support.
You've got mine as well, because my video may have been focused, but at the same time, I think that cardinal represents a lot of cardinals.
Oh.
That debate is actually on Sentinel Apologetics channel. If you want to go watch it, that's General Han Solo's channel. I don't have a wrench, so I can't.
Has anyone responded to Phil Donahue yet?
Oh my God!
Phil, that Roman Catholic apologist, that little troll.
Is he still around?
Yeah. Actually, I think.
Oh yeah. He has a long career of being a snot.
I think I just tweeted something out with him. He's the one that actually said something along the lines that he's blaming it on atheism.
Oh boy. If you do me a favor. So like right now, technically, I'm supposed to be doing Dangers of Woo and other non-response videos. I did an entire Discount Hoven series. If you can send me some links to that, that might have to be the responses that I do once I get out of my non-response video phase. I think that needs to definitely be a thing that happens. With that said, Natja, do you have anything that you would like to shout out before you go, since Steve has done his, and his is going to be down the line?
Yeah, I am working on a roast at the moment where I rip Paul Agia a new one.
Nice.
So that should be like a couple weeks away when it comes out. I don't exactly know when they're doing that, but
make sure I never piss you off, man. I never want to piss you off ever.
The most
yeah, wait for this one. I've just finished writing it, and the few people that I've shown are like, holy shit, that got dark.
The only people that legitimately could beat you in a roast, I find it funny that the people who have done the best roasts on there have been you and Jimmy, and the only person who lost to was Jimmy.
Oh God, no, Godless Iowan.
I mean, Iowan's good too. I'm sorry, I think Natja and Jimmy both beat Iowan.
Really? I don't know. Maybe I'd go back and watch.
Maybe it's because I listen to his scathing comments all the time. So to me, it's
Am I ever going to get roasted?
You are every day.
oh,
Fortunately, I have thick skin.
fair enough. All right, Wonder Lady, do you have anything going on your channel?
More of the same questions for now. Working on learning different things so I can do responses.
Okay. And then Nathan, do you have anything going on?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, my YouTube channel is Nate Talks to You, and I'll be making a new episode for my series Muslim Logic Fail, responding to the Muslim televangelist called Zakir Naik.
I love him. I have a video about him on my channel.
Oh, cool. I'll have to go check that out then. But yeah, Zakir Naik is a boatload of funny.
Yeah, he had the video that I responded to was the one where he mentioned that eating bacon makes you a cuck.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to be talking about that in my video too, yeah.
Gee, I like my bacon.
Isn't he wanted in India right now? Or he was arrested or something?
I think he might have been promoting or like being an apologist for Islamic terrorism at some point in time, so that could be part of it.
Yeah.
That could be true. I wouldn't doubt
Oh,
it.
well, boys will be boys.
And last but not least, RJ, do you have anything that you'd like to promote? We know that Evolution Hour is a thing since we did an entire thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if you don't have Evolution Slam Dunk, why the hell not? It's the thing on the reptile-mammal transition, so I'm very proud of it. It's a neat book. And then if you are okay with fiction and likes Jules Verne and mystery science fiction and steampunk and all that crap, Paralogs of Phileas Fogg, that hopefully I will be doing the audio book with Cirrus in short order, thanks to the generosity of people who helped donate so we could get a better recording equipment. Yeah. So I got 2 books out there that I get royalties from, and so it helps the old RJ, and they're good reads.
Yeah, the stream that this is actually the after show from was a fundraiser where we were trying to get RJ the equipment he needed to both do the audiobook and to work on his increase the fidelity of his channel, get him better camera, better mic setup, etc. We raised,
and boy, did it work! Thanks everybody for donating.
Just over $300 to get RJ equipment to get him started off right with his audiobooks and everything else. So everybody who donated,
puppy, don't cut it.
Yeah, that will not work. I did the research for what we need to do to produce the audiobook, and that microphone will not do it. They will not accept it, flat out. So we got everything taken care of, and RJ will have better equipment for his channel soon. So look forward to Evolution Hour doing much better now that it will have better equipment here in the coming weeks. And look forward.
I think we'll want to do an audiobook of Slam Dunk after we get Paralogs under our belt, so we can do a science book in audiobook format. It have to be restructured quite a bit to work effectively as an audiobook, but I don't see any reason why not.
Yeah, definitely. Well, for everybody who came out tonight, thank you. For everybody who came into the chat to talk live, even though we got a little political during that and maybe a tiny bit heated, thank you for that as well. I know this is an after show.
All gloomy.
I know this is a flat Earth discussion initially, but we went past that. Really not much to discuss. With that said, popping out. Have a wonderful night.